I call to order the meeting of the Committee of the Whole on April 24th, 2024 at 7:03 p.m. We start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item is roll call.
Good evening. I understand Alder Allen is delayed. Mayor Arata Frada. Here. Alder Dantzler.
Here.
Alder Gerhardt.
Here.
Alder Herbst.
Oh, he dropped.
He's dropped off up here. He was here a moment ago.
I did see him online a moment ago, so we'll see if he reappears. Alder Jetzer.
Here.
Alder Maldonado.
Here.
Alder Vafadari.
Here.
Alder Wheeler.
Here.
Thank you. You've got a quorum.
Fantastic. Next item is approval of minutes, the draft minutes from March 20, 2024, and I would like to postpone these. It looks like the minutes are incomplete in the packet. They're missing like the list of members and like the motion carried for the draft minutes. So okay, great. So could I get a motion to postpone to the next committee of the whole?
I move we postpone the minutes, the approval of the minutes to the next meeting.
Thank you. All in favor of postponement, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next item is public appearances for non-agenda items. Do we have anyone here in the audience for non-agenda items that would like to speak? Okay, we can move on to number 6, agenda items. Agenda item A, referendum update and or discussion. Ellers and the community perceptions from Mueller Communications and city staff. Who's going to kick it off?
I can kind of kick
Great,
it off
thanks,
and
Chad.
at least give a brief update on what we have planned this evening. We have our friends, consultants, financial consultants from Ellers. They will be providing a brief presentation, just refreshing how we got to this point from a conversational piece related to previous committees of the whole, talk briefly about levy limits and what a referendum might look like, and then community perceptions. We'll do a presentation to demonstrate what the community survey responses were. And then Miller Communications had an emergency. They just informed us about 20 minutes ago. So if there's anything related to Miller, Adam and I can jot that information down and get a response from Miller if there's anything related to them. And then Adam and I have a presentation as well, or some information to share. So.
And before we get started with Greg's presentation, would you prefer to keep questions to the end, or?
My comments will be fairly brief as a recap, so I'll take them either as they come or at the end, whatever your preference is.
Okay, I'll keep an eye out. Raise your hand if you have questions. Otherwise, if we can try to keep it to the end, let's attempt that. You go ahead.
Great.
Absolutely. Should we take an official recess? Can I get a motion to recess for 5 minutes?
So move.
Second.
All in favor of recess, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are recessed.
Second.
All in favor of reconvening into open session, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening. I want to start by introducing my colleague, Kayla Thorpe. Kayla recently joined Ellers after serving several years as a village administrator. She's worked on levy referendums as an administrator before, so I invited her to come along to meet all of you and share her expertise as well. I'm going to begin our conversation this evening just by giving a brief recap of levy limits, how they work, how the city has been managing levy limits over the years, and kind of recap general financial conversations we've been having with the Committee of the Whole for several years about long-term financial strategies and levy limits in particular. So just to address all the components of the city's budget that has a property tax levy component. There are several funds that receive property tax levy annually as part of the city's annual budget adoption. There's the general fund, the library fund, the transit fund, the capital fund, and your debt service fund, where general obligation debt is repaid. When we talk about levy limits, all of the operational funds, general fund, library fund, and then the transit and capital fund are all subject to the levy limit. So when we talk about what the levy limit is, those are the particular aspects of your property tax levy collection that go to specific funds that are subject to levy limits. There's one notable exemption of levy limits, and that is for general obligation debt. So the portion of your levy that gets adopted every year for debt service, that is exempt from levy limits under state law. So it's when we talk about levy limits, it's just important to understand many aspects of your levy are subject to the levy limit, with the exception of general obligation debt service, which is exempt. So what are levy limits? Levy limits have been around since 2005. And the basic premise of levy limits is that the prior year's actual levy can be increased by a percentage equal to the increase in net new construction that occurred within the community in the preceding year. So every year in August, the Department of Revenue publishes the percentage increase in net new construction for every municipality in Wisconsin, and that is what is the primary basis for how much a community can increase its levy from the prior year. If you have no net new construction, or for some reason your net new construction is negative, then your increase would be zero. There are numerous adjustments or exceptions to the levy limit that allow you to increase it above and beyond the increase due to net new construction. I mentioned the most common exemption that communities use is for debt service. So whatever amount you need to increase your levy to repay your existing general obligation debt, you can increase your levy accordingly, and that's an allowable increase above and beyond the amount for net new construction. Other adjustments that the city has used kind of as needed and as the city qualifies include there are adjustments for joint fire and EMS departments. There's certain financial criteria that has to be met each year to qualify for that adjustment. The increase in expenditures for a joint fire and EMS department, cannot exceed 2% plus an inflation factor that's tied to CPI. So the city has taken advantage of that adjustment. But generally speaking, the city on an annual basis has kind of had to live within the levy limit based on the net new construction and debt service. The other adjustments that the city has taken advantage of, kind of includes, TID adjustments are allowed the year following a TID closure. So we'll speak more to that here in detail. So how has the city specifically managed levy limits, going back to 2005? First is by establishing budget priorities. So through your annual budget process in terms of evaluating your existing service levels and looking at your capital improvement plan that you update annually, you're prioritizing those expenses. We at Ellers work with the city annually to develop a financial management plan that projects out what is needed to levy for your operations and your capital improvement plan. And then the Common Council goes through your budget prioritization process as you go through and adopt your budget. TID closures. Over the past few years, the city has closed some larger TIF districts, and the year following a TID district closure under state law, you get a one-time allowable increase in your levy limit. So half of that increase can go to increase your levy. The other half of that value that returns to the tax rolls really goes towards property tax relief by lowering your tax rate. So the city is taking advantage of those TID closures to increase your allowable levy, which is a good strategy. The city staff worked proactively with the Department of Revenue when the city absorbed portions of the town of Madison to get one-time levy limit adjustments associated with some of the costs that were incurred and absorbed into your budget when the town of Madison, the portion that came into the city of Fitchburg. So you got a one-time levy limit adjustment for that. So that was a very proactive move of the city to kind of give some additional levy limit relief. And then finally, with your 2024 budget, it was the first year that incorporated the increases to shared revenue that were part of the last state budget. The city used that to apply, cover increase in costs for existing services that have been increasing over the past few years. So that certainly helped with some of the immediate levy limit pressures that the city was dealing with, but that revenue really has kind of covered existing budget gaps for your existing services, and so isn't necessarily going to be the sustainable solution going forward in and of it by itself. So it's really a combination of all of these strategies and others that the city has used to effectively manage levy limits since their inception. Last year, when we presented the annual financial management plan, which is typically done at the end of June each year, we went into more in depth on some alternative revenue options that are available to municipalities in Wisconsin. So I'm just going to briefly recap those. This is really just to kind of provide some summary information of what has been discussed previously. So we talked about levy limit referendums specifically as a tool that's permitted under the levy limit statutes, that you can go forth and request an increase in your allowable levy for a year, for an ongoing, but you have to specify what services that you're funding through that levy limit referendum increase. We talked about impact fees, which are described under state statute, and they allow you to impose a fee that's collected when a building permit is issued to offset exclusively capital costs related to new development. Impact fees aren't intended to cover operational expenses or address, for example, an existing deficiency in a water or sewer utility, but it does allow you to charge a fee for new development to help cover their charge of that new infrastructure. We talked about a street light user charge as another revenue stream available for communities. We talked about the wheel tax, which is a program that is administered by the Department of Transportation, where you can charge a fee per vehicle and collect that to help transportation needs. We spent some time last year talking about transportation utility districts as an alternative way to raise funds for street improvement projects. Since last year, there's been some court cases that have kind of been settled that really have made utility districts not as permissible, so that's kind of an option that's off the table at this point. And then finally, we talked about payments in lieu of taxes, which are charges that are typically made by entities that aren't paying regular property taxes. They're exempt from property taxation, but they can make a payment to a community to help pay for municipal services in lieu of making a property tax payment because their property is exempt from taxation. So this is kind of a menu of options that we talked about last year as we were looking at other ways that the city could address its budgetary needs going forward. We updated kind of the existing services financial model and taking into account the city's capital improvement plan, kind of a preview of the financial management plan update that we typically prepare in June, and we'll do that again this year. But we just wanted to update that model for purposes of discussion this evening. Most of the city's non-levy revenue sources and your operating funds are fairly consistent from year to year. They don't fluctuate significantly. That's very similar to what we see in most communities throughout Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a very property tax heavy reliant state in terms of funding local government operations. There is the opportunity that there could be additional road aids and other state aids going forward based on some of the provisions put in the last budget bill. So we forecasted some increases in your state aids for the next coming fiscal year, but kind of have those leveling off going forward to be conservative. Some of your other recreational charges we increased modestly, and then internal charges within your budget to utilities and the library are increasing 5% per year. In terms of the expenditure methodology, most of the wage-driven departments, which encompasses a lot of them, those costs are increasing by about 5% per year in our model. Other expenditures are increasing anywhere from 3 to 4% per year. And then allowances have been added to reflect the staffing impact of the operating impact of the capital improvement plan. So that's something that we typically update into the model as the capital improvement plan gets updated. Not only how that impacts future borrowing and cash funding of capital projects, but how that would impact your operational departments as well. So really a very similar methodology to what we've used in the operating forecasts for the financial management plan. So what that tells us, just based off of the city's existing services, using that methodology I just summarized, that the projected levy limit gap for 2025 is $585,000. So that's the projected gap just based off of funding existing services and anticipated changes in costs for those services and factoring in some modest increases in your non-levy revenue sources. That levy limit gap for existing services is projected to increase going forward. So that levy limit gap is projected to increase up to $1,375,000 within 5 years. So as we've kind of been talking about during the financial management plan updates each year for the last few years, we've been starting to see some of these levy limit pressures. I think what's abated that these past couple of years has been, particularly the TIG closure adjustments that the city has taken advantage of, the one-time adjustments for the town of Madison, and then certainly the increased shared revenue that the city received this past year. All those strategies and just the good prioritization and decision-making that the city makes during its normal budget process have kind of, kept some of those levy limit gaps a little more manageable. But what we're really starting to see kind of statewide is that since levy limits have been in place since 2005, those increases that are allowed under the levy limit law, many communities are having a hard time finding ways to make that levy authority keep pace with the costs that they're incurring just for their existing services. So we're starting to, kind of see that pressure here in Fitchburg as well. So that's kind of the overview in terms of kind of what we've talked about historically, how levy limits work, and specifically how the city has managed those to date. So I'll pause there, see if there are any questions. If staff wishes to interject, welcome that at this time as well. Thank you.
That was a great summary. Thank you. Any questions from the council or the mayor?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
So thank you, Greg. I have a question because, on your last slide, when you said the projected levy limit gap for 25 is going to be more than almost $600,000. So that one, even if we say that we are approved to go to a referendum, that gap is going to exist anyway. So
Correct.
we need to be clear with that. You know what I mean?
Correct.
The
Yes.
referendum is not going to fix this gap.
Correct. I think it's important to note that just with your existing service levels, you're projected to have some levy limit challenges. So certainly to the extent that you're looking to expand existing services, that needs to be addressed as well. So it's really kind of a two-front initiative. It's making sure that you still have stable revenue sources to maintain existing services, but also what revenue streams are needed to make sure you have a sustainable funding source for any service expansions.
Jay.
That doesn't make sense to me that if the referendum, I presume, and I had talked with our finance director about this some time ago, that if we go to a referendum, that presumably that would include enough money to cover this gap.
So when you go to referendum, you have to kind of specify what you're asking for the levy limit referendum to fund. So that can either be specific services that you're looking to increase the levy to fund, or you have the option of looking at a more general levy authority just to kind of apply to existing operational costs. So you have the ability to address either or both. It's just how you choose to approach that in your question.
I would expect that we'd be looking at both. One question that I do want to ask you, since you just mentioned, since you mentioned last night Moody's coming to Fitchburg, how does this $500,000 funding gap affect their perception of the city for a bond rating?
The city's been able to demonstrate, that you've been able to kind of maintain your existing services and find ways to kind of address your budgetary challenges up until this point. So it has not been a detriment or a factor to your rating thus far. They look at a lot of factors in terms of your overall financial health. The city's financial metrics are very strong. You have good liquidity and cash management and available to help withstand things that are unforeseen. So, I think the city's been able to communicate, as I said, through various strategies, you've been able to manage your levy limits. But I think going forward, they're aware that it's a constraint on Wisconsin communities. All the rating agencies, as standard language in any Wisconsin credit profile, will mention levy limits as a revenue raising constraint. So, Fitchburg is viewed similarly to other Wisconsin communities that's a known constraint. So it hasn't been a direct detriment to the city thus far.
Go ahead, Don.
And then the reason, so when you had the gap there and then it like more than doubled, that reason for that was what again?
The reason for that is as your costs kind of continue to increase projected going forward, your non-levy revenue sources generally are not projected to kind of keep up with that increase in cost. So that kind of starts to kind of widen the gap. And then, we're also being conservative with your net new construction percentage going forward. The city has seen some healthier years of net new construction, but to, anticipate that that's going to continue at periods that the city has seen in higher growth periods is something we generally like to kind of guard against, so we're not getting overly aggressive with what your allowable increase would be just based off of growth.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right. Looks like
Thank
no more
you,
questions. Yeah.
Ellers. We appreciate the information. And we'll transition now to Rob Demuse and Scott Gerard from Community Perceptions for a summary and presentation on the community survey that was completed regarding the referendum.
Good evening, everybody. I am going to bring up our summary slides here. All right. That's just a little key for the slides ahead. A little reminder of our background. We've been doing this type of survey since 2002, and we've helped more than 900 communities, including Fitchburg, around the library process, navigate strategic planning and referendum planning. So a little background on your survey. There was a March 22nd deadline. We ended up with 2,138 respondents for a 14.1% response rate based on sending one to every household in the city. And that gives us about a 2.16% margin of error, plus or minus. So first, we've got some demographic information on your respondents. As you can see, the respondents leaned toward the older population in your city. They often are reliable voters, and so it's honestly a good thing to see good representation from that demographic. Renter or homeowner, we had 85% of respondents were homeowners and 15% were renters. We've got some background on how folks like to receive city information. So, as you determine what your final plan is going forward, this could be useful in how you want to share information on that. And then we always ask on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend the city to a friend or family member? And this is some pretty nice data here. With nearly 3/4 of respondents at 7 or higher. That's nice to see and some strong data. So now we'll get on to the referendum projects. A little reminder of how the projects were presented in the survey. So under the header of public safety staffing, we had a minimum increase would entail these positions. So 5 police officers, 6 firefighters, and the ability to accept federal funding through a COPS grant. A comprehensive increase in public safety staffing adds a lot more police positions, some additional firefighters and positions to the fire department, and paramedics for Fitchburg EMS. And then under city services staffing, minimum increase included a community services director, 2 finance positions, a city communication director, and 2 human resources positions. A comprehensive increase included the above positions, as well as others that are not listed here, but some of the ones that were mentioned included an assistant city attorney, different maintenance positions, bilingual service positions, and technology systems administrators. So we asked respondents to prioritize the projects on a high, medium, or low scale, high being address now in a referendum. As you can see, the two most prioritized projects among respondents were public safety staffing and minimum city staffing. Both of those are above 2, which is sort of that median, with the medium being at a value of 2. So those were the two priorities. And then you've got the police services facility, transit, and comprehensive city staffing, all slightly below that 2 line. Then we also asked folks how much funding they would be willing to support through a referendum based on the tax increases attached to that funding. And so we did break it down by renters and homeowners here, and then we've got the overall data. And what we found is you break that 50% mark to get majority support at a $2.9 million referendum. It's a little short of that 50% mark at $3.6 million. One thing to note here is relatively small group of people saying they wouldn't support any referendum. I think in a lot of communities, we find that number can be around 25 to 30%. And so that's good data to show that there is an understanding that there's a need out there and some willingness from your community to support something. So then this is the final slide I'll be showing you, but we've got the projects ordered by priority and their cost. And then we add those up to sort of show you how something can build based on the priority order of folks' responses. So minimum public safety staffing and minimum city staffing, you're still under that $2.9 million threshold. The police services facility puts you right up near it. And then we get into transit and comprehensive city staffing that put you slightly above it, in between where you go under that 50% range. And the rest of the slideshow shows some information on what was in your survey, but that's the data we've got for you tonight. So happy to take questions.
Nicole.
Could you just give us an idea, the 14% response rate, clearly we all want 100% response rate so we can hear everyone's opinions, but how does that rank and stack against municipalities similar size and makeup to ours? Is that a particularly good response rate, particularly low?
I would say it's a solid response rate. Rob, I don't know if you have a specific number on what our average is, but I've certainly seen lower response rates on some of the surveys I've done.
Yeah, you're actually, I think, probably the biggest municipality we've done, maybe not school district. I was hoping to see it break 15%. You weren't that far behind it, but I think one of the things that we saw the last 2 to 2.5 weeks or so was your data stayed very steady. It was very noisy the first couple of weeks, which is expected. It goes up and it goes down, and support varies quite a bit, and then it really quieted out over the last, really since we saw you last. There's been some changes, and we've honored that data that's come in, but it really hasn't changed all that much. So I would have loved to see it break 15, but we actually had a lower proportional response rate for the library. It ended up being pretty darn close to what the result was for your library project. So with a little bit of history there in Fitchburg, I feel pretty good about where you landed. Would have loved to see it higher too, but I'm not worried about the results and its predictive accuracy.
Thank you.
Can I? Yeah, could you put up the slides again where you showed the preferences for what how people ranked each thing? I feel like we saw minimum versus comprehensive city staff, but for public safety, there was just one line item. Do we know how that breaks out between minimum and comprehensive?
So, I'll explain. I can show you the slide if you want, but part of the reason I didn't include that in the ranking is the comprehensive public safety staffing alone was over $4 million. And so that was by itself above the threshold of what could be supported based on that funding question. We did find similar support, I would say, between minimum and comprehensive when we did break down that data.
So I saw like the age difference of the individuals that responded, and then also the disparity in renters versus homeowners. Was there any type of qualitative data or anything that was coupled with this quant data to better explain kind of some of that gap and what those individuals would need in terms of how they can better be served or increase the response rate in terms of those? Because I feel like with that big of a dispersion, we're mainly focusing really on homeowners in that aspect and not really getting to those renters and then those younger individuals who may not have responded to the survey as well.
Yeah, we did do an analysis of the comments that were left, qualitative wise, and we did send that over to the mayor and city staff, I think yesterday maybe, or maybe today. So I'm sure they would be able to share that with you. But we did do an analysis of the comments that were left as well.
Were there any thematic themes you could share real quick? If not, it's fine.
Let me bring that up here. In general, there was a lot of concern. I would say a mix of concern about financial sustainability of some of these projects and taxing on homeowners. Desire for more information.
I don't know if you meant to be sharing, but you were.
Thank you. Here we go. On the funding support specifically here, summarizing some of the comments there. There were questions.
Can you zoom in a little bit? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think there's some openings for more communication. So some themes throughout the different projects was a desire for more information. Some questions about understanding why growth in the city itself isn't covering enough of the revenue to fund some of these initiatives. That question came up throughout. Generally, there was some discussion about whether funding for police was the best way to spend that money. Requests for alternative revenue sources. You just heard a presentation from Ellers on what options you do have, limited or not, but respondents wanted to understand some of those options that were in front of them.
I would echo what Scott said. I think as we were reading through this together, I think that the number one takeaway I had from the qualitative data was that, we know the city's been growing a lot, and there was confusion of like, if we're growing so much, why can't that, additional valuation in our city, or whether it's the town of Madison that will be annexed, or basically that growth, why doesn't that cover what we're currently testing here? And I don't know that it was opposition or support because of that. I think it was just genuine confusion of like how those two things maybe don't match up for folks and why growth can't cover it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Joe.
I know the last time we had a discussion, we talked about the Spanish version of the survey. Had that been, how many responses came back in Spanish?
Checking that number right now. Rob, are you able to access that?
Yeah, I'm pulling it up. So I don't know, because they would have been, if they were taken on paper, I just have one number for how many were taken on manually entered by us on paper. And it looks like it's around 80, but I can't tell how many of those 80 were of the Spanish speakers. I'd have to ask our data entry person how many she translated.
So to clarify, it's only possible that the Spanish language surveys were of that 80. Okay, so there were electronic.
No online Spanish surveys were taken.
No, okay, got it.
No online Spanish surveys were taken. Of the 80 that were entered by us, I don't know how many of those were Spanish.
I would just request that be provided to council, please.
Sure.
So I had one question, but now I have two. So as a follow-up to that, is it fair in stating, was the statement that there were no Spanish-speaking responses to an online survey, or did we not offer the survey online in Spanish?
The former, not the latter.
Okay,
Available
great.
online in Spanish, but
Great.
no Spanish speakers chose to take it online. Of the ones that were entered manually, though, I'm not sure how many of those came back in Spanish. I could only see
Fair
the number
enough.
entered by us, but I don't know how many entered
Fair
were in
enough.
Spanish.
Okay, thank you. I just had a question about the slide that shows referendum support by, by home ownership types. When I just look at the slide as a non-trained data person, it looks like renters are more supportive of a larger referendum, if I'm reading that properly. Can you anecdotally state, is that because they're not as affected by it? They're a smaller sample size? Can you kind of speak to that?
Scott, I'll let you go first, and then I'll chime in. But
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, I think with homeowners, you can take the numbers that are on the survey and do the math for directly how it's going to impact your property tax bill. And that's not to say it doesn't impact renters, but there's an extra step there, right? That they can't do the calculation. It depends on how their landlord responds to that property tax increase and what that means for their rent. And so it's an extra step that is just a little different than a homeowner who's looking at it, putting their property value in a calculator and figuring out what it means.
yeah, I had the same thought. For the obscene amount of rent I was paying, I didn't know how much was going to their property taxes and how much was I going to the heat that was supposedly included in my, in my rent and whatnot. So because it was indirect and because I couldn't tell that, and obviously they were never going to tell us, and because it was spread out among the, 250, 300 units that were in the building I was living in. It's not uncommon to see greater support from renters, only because there is that I can't exactly tell how much of my rent is going to various places in total.
Thank you.
Bill, oh, sorry, Jay, you're next.
Yeah, Nicole, you kind of touched on a sore spot because many of us on the council were highly critical of that survey that went out and the lack of Spanish on that form. There was one tiny little paragraph, 3 lines long on the first page, that basically said, go to this website to do this survey, but that paragraph in Spanish didn't say anything about what the survey was or why people should go there or what they were going to be asked. So if you were a primary Spanish speaker, which accounts for about 20% of the population of the city, and you got that mailing, you very likely just pitched it because all the bold stuff was in English. The Spanish section was in italics; it wasn't even in bold, and there was a lot of unhappiness on this council for the way that went down. And I do hope that as we move through this, our educational process will be a little more comprehensive and will actually make an endeavor to include the 20% of the population that primarily speaks Spanish.
Bill?
Yeah, so if we're looking at that slide again where you had renters versus homeowners versus overall, is the overall just an average of all the responses, or did you try and normalize that because only 15% of the responses were renters, even though 50% of the population is renters? Can you just say a few words about that?
It is just the overall is of the respondents.
Yeah, it wasn't weighted in any way. I don't think I knew what the proportion of renters are in, or the proportion of renters that vote in Fitchburg as well. So it's just the overall, it's not weighted in any way.
And then lastly, was there any other demographic slices that you all did with the data outside of age and whether they were a renter or a homeowner?
There was not, no.
Okay.
And staying on this referendum support graphic, Can you just talk through again, like how you interpret this as building support for a referendum in the city? So, like, the way I'm reading this is that you think that there is a high confidence that the majority of the city supports at least 3.6 million in revenue for a referendum, or can you kind of comment on that?
2.9. Yeah, 2.9. And so
Oh, 2.9.
how that works is you got 14% that supported 5.8, 6% that supported 5, 12% here that supported 4.3, plus the 16 that supported 3.6. And then where you cross that threshold of 50% is within that 8% that said they'd support a 2.9 million.
Okay. And then
Yeah, so the logic there is if you're willing to support a 5.8, we found that you're willing to support 5, and because it only gets cheaper as you go. So we don't have any granularity, obviously, between 2.9 and 3.6, but it's, I think 2.9 you would go, what is my math, 32, 48, so 50, and anticipated 56% support for 2.9 million and 48% for 3.6, which is just outside that margin of error. So you're probably looking at a number that's between 2.9 and 3.6, but certainly much closer to 2.9 than 3.6.
okay, and then I guess we can maybe bring this up more as we move into a discussion about if we want to vote, what scale the referendum we would want to vote on. But do you have information about other communities and what that type of result was versus what they asked for in the referendum versus whether or not that was successful?
Yeah, I can answer that. So what we don't do is measure how many of our customers pass a referendum, because that's just really not in the business that we're in. We're not in the business of making sure people say yes or no. We try to be as unbiased as we can for you. What I will tell you is that over the last maybe 5 to 6 years, our accuracy rate hovers between 94 and 95%. So with the recommendation that we make, if a district or a community takes that to ballot, and it passes, that's a success in our world. But say if you were to take, 5 million to ballot, and this data is telling us that it would fail, and then you take that to ballot and it fails, that's still a win in our world because that's an accurate prediction. So we don't count successes based on whether a referendum passes, because that's just not what we're in the business of doing. So I would say our accuracy rate is quite high. We've actually never missed in Minnesota. We're not perfect in Wisconsin, but we're darn close, especially over the last 5 to 6 years. And I think just on April alone, just looking at school districts, not municipality referendums, we were 20 of 23.
And does Minnesota face levy limits?
I don't know about municipalities. They call them levy referendums or levies in Minnesota, and the school districts do. But
All right, so a little bit different context for Minnesota than Wisconsin. Mayor?
Yes, can you put back the slide from the referendum support, please? My interpretation of that slide is that, 2.9 is, this is the recommendation, but if we look at, that 16% of the population are okay with a 3.6. It's like 48% are okay with a $3.6 million. So it will be okay for us if we can decide if we decided, and when we look at the numbers, which amount, we can go 2.9 and a couple of $100,000 more, but be below 3.6. We can play with that range, isn't it? We are okay. Okay.
yes, that's correct. Yep. Yeah, the takeaway here is if you were to hold 3.6 today, it would probably very narrowly fail. 2.9 looks like it would be north of majority. So somewhere in that sweet spot between 2.9 and 3.6, but probably a hair closer to 2.9 than 3.6.
Okay.
So we've got a lot of months between now and then, and presumably during that time we're going to be doing a educational campaign, and some of us will be campaigning in favor of this on our own time. What kind of effect does that have on moving the needle?
It certainly helps. If there's a yes group that's out there, it depends on how strong you anticipate a no group to be, because sometimes they are just as strong, if not stronger, than a yes group. So it depends on if you're anticipating anything that, but you're at a pretty normal timeline in terms of when we make predictions. Typically for a November election, we do a survey about 6 months out or so, and that's almost you're about 6 months in a week or two out from the November election, and that's when we make our predictions, and that's when our prediction rate can stay pretty high. You have some undecideds, not a lot in the scheme of things actually. What did you have? 10% up there, Scott?
15%.
15%. And it's not uncommon to have, up the upper teens, if not lower 20s of the folks that are undecided. We do find though that no more than about a quarter of undecideds will break towards yes. The overwhelming majority will break towards no. So I would say kind of the cap on undecideds is probably about 2% that you'll sway. The overwhelming majority of undecideds will break towards no.
And go ahead. Will you, in terms of like what we get from out of this survey, do we have access to some of that data and those comments and all of that? Is that something that the council can see and look over?
I just send you to you guys.
Great.
Okay.
Great. Any other questions from the council?
I have.
Chad, go ahead.
For community perceptions, in relation to your statement about your prediction, 6 months out for a November election, how do you feel about prediction if the council were to select to do a referendum during the August partisan primary?
In general, more referendums pass with higher turnout. The correlation is fairly tight in Wisconsin. Whether my prediction doesn't really change a whole lot. The closer you get, the higher the accuracy is. But in general, more referendums pass during higher turnout elections. I'd be more worried if you were on the other end. If we were trying to make a prediction a year out, that would give me the heebie-jeebies a little bit. But the closer to the election day, the tighter that's going to stay.
Bill.
Yeah, so whatever the number is, that's going to be constant moving forward forever, right? So essentially, it's going to be losing value over time due to inflation. And so whatever we advertise that this revenue increase is going to cover, down the line, as inflation increases and this number stays the same, we're going to have to drop some of those services and or staff off of the list. How does that factor into our educational campaign?
I think that one's probably for us. Is that what you're thinking?
Well, I'm assuming that the intended audience is probably this body, Ellers, and community perceptions, because, I would assume that this is going to appear in the educational campaign, which is largely put together by community perceptions, but Ellers has all the deep financial knowledge. And
actually, the intent would be the education outreach campaign would be facilitated with the assistance of Miller Communications. If you recall, in September they have a third phase that they would have available for us. Obviously, they've assisted us through the communications and outreach to this point. And if the council elects to move forward with a referendum, we would look to bring forward that contract and request to engage their services for the third phase.
My mistake. Out of sight, out of mind.
Looks like we have.
Just
go ahead.
One last question. For data collection, these were only sent via through the mail, or they could do it online. There were no live meetings or things that happened where people could come and ask questions and do it there, correct? It was just the two?
They were sent, they were sent to every household, one copy, and then they were able to either fill that out on paper and mail it back or fill it out online. And they had the opportunity to call and request an extra code if there were multiple members of a household or anything like that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
How many were papers? 80? Okay.
Chad, you want to take it away?
Yes.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up, I think we have the city staff are going to give us a presentation. Yeah, will you all hang out for the conversation that we were going to have to come? Scott and Rob? Okay.
Sure.
Thank you. Do we do a recess?
Move to 5-minute recess.
They're moving.
No second.
I'll second that.
Recess? Okay, we have a motion on the table for a 5-minute recess and a second.
second.
All in favor for a recess, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. We are recessed.
Well, we were already in open session. We'll just reconvene.
You need a second?
Yes.
Second.
All in favor of reconvening, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We are back in session. And I'll send it to Chad and Adam.
Thank you, everyone. We'll get started here with some staff information regarding the potential referendum. So if the council elects to proceed with a referendum and would like to do that for a potential August partisan primary, this is the tentative timeline that we would be looking at. Obviously, we have our committee of the whole meeting this evening. We would look to have council vote on either May 14th or May 28th on the referendum question. The question needs to be submitted to Dane County no later than June 5th to be included on the ballot. And then, of course, the remainder of that time, May through August, we would be doing referendum education and outreach with Miller Communications, city staff, and, of course, elected officials. And then August 13th would be the referendum vote. A November referendum timeline would look something more along the lines of this. Again, we're here at our Committee of the Whole this evening. August 27th would be the last meeting in which the council could place a vote on a referendum question, because the deadline to get that question to Dane County would be August 28th. And then we would use September and October largely for referendum outreach and education. Again, and that's a bit dependent upon when the council would elect to move to referendum. For instance, if in the last meeting of July, council voted to move to a referendum, obviously we could begin the outreach and education sooner if that was the case. And then November 5th would be the actual referendum.
You know, this reminds me of Al Cooper, who used to serve on Fitchburg's Plan Commission, and he would always say, people take as long as they have. And I mean, I'm looking at this and I'm wondering, if we decide we want to do the referendum, why would we wait till September to start the educational campaign? Even if we're going to have the referendum in November, why would we pick that timeline instead of having the vote and deciding to do this in May and then having 2 extra months to do the education?
Yeah, ultimately, the education outreach can be started at any point in which the council elects to move to referendum. I think the challenge will be is identifying that sweet spot of when are we too early to begin that information, and then it drops off of folks' attention and radar, so to speak. So I think working with the communications consultant who's experienced in this realm will help guide us to determine what's the ideal timeline as far as having that outreach and education period.
Well, okay, but I think 3 months to do the education campaign is just not enough, especially because that's a November 5th, so it's really only 2 months. I think if we decide to do this and we decide to do a November 5th vote, that we should be educating throughout the whole summer. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me that we would, especially with the complexity of some of these issues. Like, I think we need to explain to people why the levy limit affects us this way.
Yeah.
Because I bet you if you picked 10 random people off the street in Fitchburg, probably not even one of them would know that there even was a levy limit, let alone why it's affecting us in this way. So I think our educational and again, I don't want to see another 30-page document go out there. I think we need to break this into smaller, bite-sized pieces so that people can get up to speed without, without having just a volume dropped on them, and they have 2 months to read it before they take a vote.
Yeah, I think we should maybe dig into this. Let's continue, and then when we talk about when we want to have the vote, we can talk about the timeline at that point as well, once we get consensus on that.
Sounds good.
Can I just ask a question about education?
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like, and do we get to decide like what those educational pieces are and how it's dispersed to or given to the public?
Yes, absolutely. There would be input provided by the council, working in conjunction with Miller Communications. In general sense, what they have done in the past is they work with communities to provide, I think, 3 mailings that typically are along the lines of an infographic to help kind of capture those high-level or significant pieces that the community may be seeking information on. We'll certainly use the comments that were summarized from the survey to also help guide where that educational components may need to also be focused as well. So, yeah, there would definitely be, if council elects to move to referendum, we would have Miller in here to help provide that information and get some feedback. So we did take a look at what some of the pros and cons may be of looking at an August referendum versus a November referendum for council to consider. Some of the positives that have been identified, at least from a staff and consulting perspective, is the timeliness of an August referendum allows staff the certainty of whether or not there are positions that are going to be included in the 2025 budget. That may help staff who are feeling that their departments might have capacity or other resources issues and could be a benefit to retention and recruiting. We do have the COPS grant funding. An August referendum does positively impact the COPS grant funding. I think you'll see in a later slide the police officers that could be hired underneath that grant need to be hired on September 1st. Could lead to a more efficient budget process. We would still need to work out the details on how we would address the unknown budget situation if we move through our typical operating budget timeline, which would have the mayor's proposed operating budget released in September, amendments in October, and passage in November. Focused attention. At this point in time, there does not appear to be any other referendum or other election-related issues on the August referendum. And avoiding election information fatigue, recognizing that there is possibility of other or additional items on the ballot in November, allowing fewer items in August, may allow our referendum to stand on its own merits and allow us to get that information out to our voters. The negatives, obviously the council may need to decide rather quickly, or not may, they will need to decide quickly if they want to move into an August referendum. And then lower voter turnout typically happens at the partisan primary in August. I know city staff has shared those numbers historically from the last 2 partisan primaries in comparison to the last 2 general elections. One thing that may positively impact voter turnout for this year's August partisan primary is there will be a primary for Dane County Executive on August 13th. And then, of course, the summertime is also a time when folks may be on vacation. If we look at November, pros, tend to be time. Council has more time to discuss, debate, and evaluate whether or not to go to referendum. And obviously, as mentioned during the community perception survey, higher voter turnout is generally likely to occur in November than August. Some of the negatives that have been identified include that aforementioned election information fatigue. The timeline from a March survey to November is relatively long, although we did hear from our survey consultants that using their data to predict 6 months out may not be problematic. We also recognize that there are likely to be many additional mailings, flyers, and other political-related campaign items that will be hitting mailboxes, and will our information get potentially lost in the shuffle? That also ties into the competing potential other issues. It's seemingly likely that the Madison School District, which serves a portion of the city of Fitchburg and its residents, and the city of Madison may be heading to referendum in November. And will we be competing for attention through the media and other avenues in order to get our messaging out related to the Fitchburg referendum? And then, of course, the presidential election will also be on many people's minds as well, and will that also take away attention from our referendum? We haven't fully identified how we will address the budget process if we wait until November. I think the council meeting would be November 12th. So we would basically have 1 week to have a response budgetarily based on the outcome of the referendum. We can probably identify ways to work through that, but at this point in time, we're not entirely certain how that may happen. And then, as I mentioned in an earlier slide, the COPS grant that has been awarded to the city to hire 5 police officers and cover approximately 1/3 of the funding for 3 years on those 5 police officers has a deadline to hire those officers by September 1st of 2024. It could be possible to request an extension on that, but we don't know. And we certainly don't know what the federal government's response to that extension request might be. So that's the general rundown of timeline, and I think we might be at a point where a discussion on whether or not this council seeks to provide direction to staff to prepare for a referendum, and if so, when would you like us to start preparing to go to that referendum? So why don't we start, if you're open to it, with the first question and see if we can get some direction on where the council might be on whether or not you'd like to go to referendum.
Ask clarifying questions before we vote on this or take a pulse.
Yeah, if you feel like you're not ready to
I just have a couple
comments.
questions based on the pros and cons
Please
that
do.
were just shown. Okay, thank you. The first one, we listed the pros and cons as voter turnout because of August and vacation time. I feel like another thing might also be disproportionate turnout within different demographic groups. Being a mother of young kids and knowing young families, they are often vacationing in August. So I just wanted to state, I also fear as though that could skew disproportionately in younger families not really being able to turn out. The second question I had was, we're talking a lot about, or you mentioned mailing fatigue, which I feel like is really real. It begs the question of the sessions we do plan to have. When I was on the school board and we passed a $19 million referendum, we had to do 2 budgets, and they were painful to do because one of them included not hiring a bunch of teachers. And we had to do a lot of these things, but we also really found a lot of success with in-person sessions. It got through a lot of noise. We held 2 in Spanish, 1 in person and 1 remote. So I guess that was my other question that really does define my vote. Are we planning on having in-person sessions as well as mailings?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Oh, I did have one more question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
On the COPS grant, when you said it covers 1/3 of the funding over 3 years, there's not a way for ask for that 1/3 of the funding to cover the first year in entirety, right? It's like 1/3 of every year.
So typically, those actually start out higher in the first year and step down in year 2 and 3. For the purposes of the conversation tonight, when I use a third, and I'm looking at over the 3-year period, it's about a third of the cost. So, but it will start out higher and then step down in years 2 and 3.
But there will still be a gap in that first year of funding.
If the referendum were to pass, there would not
Right.
be a
If it
gap.
didn't, or
Correct.
if we delayed it, we would have to plan for a gap in
Correct.
that first year. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
You bet.
Can I clarify something?
Yes.
If we don't go to referendum, we are not going to accept the grant because we don't have the money. So that one, maybe you didn't know that, but the condition to accept the grant is an approved referendum.
A successful recommend, yeah.
Yeah, successful referendum.
But maybe we can just start by, can we just go down the line and say if people are open to moving forward with the referendum? Kind of a yes, no. Feel free to clarify if you want to clarify. But for me, yes, I think we should move forward with the referendum. Can we start down here with Joe?
Yes, I would be in favor.
I would as well.
Yes.
I don't think we have a choice.
Yes, and for November.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we're a yes on moving forward. So I think then the next question is the August versus November. So I think Donald,
I say November.
strongly in favor of November. Anyone else
You
have
want
a
me to say
strong?
why?
Yes, please, please do. Yeah, go for it.
I just think that these, especially looking at the data we got from like the survey and things, it's important on what was there, but it's also important on what wasn't there. And some of the voices that may have not, that we need to focus on, is what the survey also told us. And I think those education components are going to be crucial to making sure that individuals in the city of Fitchburg are really understanding what they're voting for, what the impact is, and all of those things moving forward. So it's not one of those things where we have the city constantly guessing and they're like, well, those guys were just sitting up there and they decided they wanted to have this referendum, but really make a communicative approach to this and referendum, and at least providing as much information and being as transparent as possible about what's to come and get the input from there.
Bill and then Joe.
Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts here. I wonder if the folks from Community Perceptions have any additional insight as to whether, given the what we know, whether they feel like an August or a November referendum would have a greater chance. Which date do they feel like we'd have a greater chance of passing?
When we look at school district results specifically, we work with schools just a little bit more, so I'm going to talk about those. But I think a referendum. My thought would change, I guess, because you're a municipality as opposed to a school district. November presidential have the highest proportion of referendums that pass, followed by November gubernatorial, followed by April. And there are some smatterings then about school districts as opposed to municipalities when they can hold a referendum. I don't know if this is helpful or not, but I guess, one thing I can't judge for is, how quickly you want to make sure the money's in place. And that's a value judgment. And just, that's within the books that I can't judge. I have been to some of those educational sessions, and they do get kind of heated sometimes about accusations of, are you trying to control an election because you only want some people to turn out? And if you want to hear everybody's thought, should we really have an election that is not when maximum turnout is? And I'm not saying that you're doing that certainly by any means. I see that happen, and I know that everybody's heart is in the right spot, but there are big accusations of, why don't you have it when turnout is highest? And who are you trying to get to vote? Are you trying to make sure some people don't vote? And it's just, it gets really messy, and it's really hard. Then people want to talk about that, and the conversation is so far away about the really cool things that a referendum can do to improve transit or the other services, parks, and other things that you can do with your city. And you're talking about things that just are unrelated to the education campaign, and all the education campaign is, why are we holding it when we are? That is not a reason to do it in August. That's not a reason to do it in November. That's purely something that we see quite frequently even in April, when there are referendums, people question, like this year specifically, why are you doing it now? Why don't you wait till more people vote in November? And it's something that I would anticipate being asked if there is a decision to move forward in August, why you did that as opposed to November.
I guess maybe just a clarification follow-up. If we could have like a mock ballot for what the August ballot would look like and what the November ballot would look like. That's kind of what I'm asking for. If there's multiple referenda on one ballot versus a single referendum, I would think that would, like we said earlier, focused attention. But I guess before I can really say whether I would prefer August or November, I might like to see sample ballots if it's possible to mock that up. Well, so like if you go to myvote.wi.gov, you can see your next ballot.
The August one will impact the November one, right?
But I think we can predict
Right.
what's going
Well,
to be on there.
exactly.
We know the
That's
Dane
my
County
point.
executive primary is in August, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, so you can construct what you think the August ballot and the November ballots are going to look like, and once you have them in front of you, I think that might alter your opinion potentially.
Well, I think
It's my understanding, Alder
Madison, and it's going to be the school
let's
district. It's gonna
chat.
be there.
Yeah, it's my understanding the referendum question are always on the last thing that's on the ballot.
You say where it's located.
Yeah. So depending on how many pages the ballot is, it could be on the back side if it's a 2-page ballot.
Oh, the location.
If it's a 3-page ballot, it would be obviously on the 3rd page and so forth. So, and that's a component as far as the education and outreach is to ensure that constituents know where to find that question as well. Yes, exactly. So, so obviously if we're the only referendum on the ballot, when you get to that would be the last thing on the ballot. If there is, for instance, a Madison Metropolitan School District referendum on the ballot, then those residences that are served by the Madison Metropolitan School District would have 2 questions on that ballot. One would be identified for the Madison Metropolitan School District. One would be identified by the city of Fitchburg. I do not know how those would be ordered. I don't know how that works at this point in time. And then those residences that are either in the Oregon or Verona School District would just see the city of Fitchburg referendum, assuming there weren't any other referendum on the ballot.
You have any follow-ups, Bill? Okay, Joe?
I want to reiterate kind of my thoughts to Alder Dantzler, just giving context to like the last time we had the consultant show up. I understand the rationale behind targeting people that regularly vote, but I also recognize the inequity in that, and I have an issue with it. So I think that voter outreach is going to be crucial, particularly for underserved groups. I mean, when you do intentional voter outreach, you do see groups with less access show up. So I think I would be in favor of a November election or a November referendum because of the same reasons. And I would also say we need to really be beefy with how we outreach to residents, and Alder Rapadari hit it right on the head that we need in-person sessions. They need to have interpretation. They need to be in places where our residents of color live, our residents that are transportation insecure live, and we need to ensure that this is broadly advertised in multiple languages in its entirety.
I can just add, I think the only part that's giving me pause is I really do understand the pain of having 2 budgets. Like it really didn't feel good. And I don't know about the city structure, but the school board was able to run at a little bit of a debt. And I think things were structured differently, but I hate the idea of us giving up a grant because we can't get the money secured in time. Like I don't love that piece. But for all the reasons stated, I think the voter turnout, especially in this very charged presidential election, is going to be rather high. And I think it could really, just change things. I think what was raised by Rob is a perception that I don't want, which is like, are we trying to sneak something by? So I would be, as much as I hate the burden it's putting on city staff and those having to be so mindful about the budget, I would be in favor of November as well.
Yeah, so when you put the pros and cons, like August obviously appeals to me in some ways, but there is something to be said for a referendum. There are like two things that we're thinking about, right? We want this referendum to pass because we know the city needs the funding. Like it's something that we are all intimately aware with. And if we were given the choice, we would just choose to fund the city at the level it's needed, at the services level that's needed. But that choice has been taken away from us by the state government. So, but just wanting it to pass is not really enough. That if we're going to go to referendum, like we're ultimately asking the voters to choose whether or not they want us to raise their taxes. And so having more voters weigh in on that is better. Just, philosophically, it's better to have more people be able to have a say. And I do really, I'm concerned about the noise, the length of the ballot, but I've been really impressed with voters in Fitchburg. I feel like in the processes that we've had over the last years that I've been intimately involved in the council, I feel like we have a highly engaged electorate and people really care about the city. And I think with the police services facility conversation in particular, people were really tuned in suddenly to these things cost money and I think we brought people's attention to the city through that process in a way that was good for the city overall. And so I do think that an education process, even in the noisy environment of an election, will be successful. And I think we're going to get people's attention. And I have faith that our residents will be able to engage with that educational content and make the choice that's best for them. And I'll echo what Nicole says. It's terrible to have to do two budgets, Misty. I'm so sorry. And the cops grant is a concern. So I guess I'm not 100% on Team November, but I'll say that. Jim.
Yeah, I would just like to, the only thing I would like to add is if we're going to go to November, what is the process and what is it going to look like to do everything that's being talked about here? Because it seems to always come up when we're talking about something important. And, I whispered over to Donald about is the DEI committee going to be up and running where they can actually look at the stuff before it goes out instead of, putting it out, coming back, and then we're like, well, this isn't right. Because I think we've been through this enough times where we know what we need to do, but I just think we need to have a process in place and we need to stick to that process, that if this is what we're going to put out, then the information we get back will be what we need. So I guess I'm asking you, Mayor, will that committee be up and running that you had mentioned?
I am still forming the committee and talking to residents. It's going to take a month for me to, to find the people. Maybe if we have a meeting in June, mid of June could be.
Well, at least,
you know what I mean? So
right.
I need at least 1.5, 2 months. You know what I mean? I am doing this job part-time.
Right.
So, yes, I will say 1.5 or 2 months is going to take me to put together this committee.
Right. Even if it's not something formal, at least it's something that everybody can have input of what it should look like. So at least I think on this committee, even with our new alders, we could come up with something that would be acceptable to everyone to actually go out and use that as a template for the future.
Just as a side note on that, I think we should call this committee something other than DEI because that has become toxic in this state right now. So I don't care what you call it, and I'm not asking you for a name. I'm just saying something other than that.
I mentioned the other night that we don't know exactly how. Maybe it's going to be Community Equity Council or
That's
something
fine.
like that.
I don't care. I just don't want to see that phrase anywhere near. And, we'll have to write an ordinance that's going to define its scope and all that. So, I mean, there's a time period involved. If we have the referendum in August, I don't think it's that big of a leap to explain why, because the why would be that our budgeting process doesn't really work very well with a November referendum without involving an enormous amount of additional staff time. So I think that's easily explainable in a way that doesn't, betray some bias that we're trying to only pick certain voters. But having said that, I do think November provides us a better opportunity to get a broader swath of the voting public, and so I understand the challenges that staff is going to have writing two budgets, but I think we just have to do it. I'd rather not, but 1 week isn't enough time to write a whole budget. So obviously we have to prepare ahead of time, and it just seems to me like November election is the time this should be done. I thought about this a lot since the last committee of the whole meeting, because we had talked about this then, and back then I was still on Team August, but now it really seems like November is when we should do it. And some of the feedback I've heard from people, especially a few people who I talked to at the pancake breakfast, they were like, you really ought to do it in November. So I think I haven't heard anybody outside of this room suggest that August is the time to do it. So all the contacts I've had with residents they've been November. And we aren't going to know what could potentially be on the November ballot until, can you go to that previous slide? That's the one. So the question has to get to the county by August 28th, and so we aren't going to know what else is going to be on the November ballot until August 28th. There may be rumblings because other bodies that may be considering a referendum are going to have these very same discussions we're having right now. But we haven't necessarily heard those rumblings, but it sounds like there's definitely going to be a referendum in Madison. And when did you say they were doing theirs?
I would anticipate November.
Yeah.
Yep.
So typically, but that's the city of Madison.
I think it's possible that both the city of Madison and the Madison Metropolitan School District may be having referendum in November.
So typically the way these things are on the ballot, if there are multiple jurisdictions having a referendum, the way that I have seen these go in the past is usually if there's a statewide referendum, that's the first question. If there's a countywide referendum, that's next. If there's school district, that's third, and then city is the last, city or village. So I think if we have questions on there, they're going to be at the bottom of the ballot, and they may be on the back side depending on how much stuff is on the ballot. Obviously, if there's a city of Madison referendum, we won't have to vote on that. But part of the city of Fitchburg, it's about 20%, 25% of the households are in the Madison School District. Yeah, so part of Fitchburg will be voting on a Madison School District if there is one. I don't know if Oregon or Verona have talked about it at all.
Verona won't be doing a referendum in the fall.
Good.
Both Oregon and Verona school districts just did a referendum last year, so that we don't anticipate that they'll be back at it already, and obviously Alder Vafadari has confirmed at least Verona doesn't intend to be.
Yeah, so, and then we had, I don't think the county's going to be doing anything else. I don't know what may get thrown on the ballot for statewide referenda, because right now the legislature seems to just be throwing stuff out at random whenever they feel like it, so who knows what they may put on, but, that's where I think we're headed with it. So it may be that for most residents of the city of Fitchburg, the only referendum that will be on the ballot will be this.
Regarding suppose that the Madison School District goes to a referendum. So So we need to know the numbers. How many residents in Fitchburg, if we can get number, how many households are going to, belong to the Madison School District, and if we know the demographic of how many families they have kids in the school. Because this is what it happened. I am Madison. So when I look these two questions, I don't have kids in the school district. So I'm going to be more prone to vote for Fitchburg referendum than from the school. But if you have kids in the school, maybe having, you're going to be more too prone to vote for the school referendum, not for the Fitchburg referendum, So this is what I would like to know, if we can get some data to determine how, because I don't know if it could be, this is, I don't know. It could be, I could, if I were me in that case, if I have kids in the school,
I think you bring up a great point.
I
I think
wanna
that's
be more
100%
prone to-
accurate.
But I want to know exactly if that
Yes.
percentage of household that belongs to the Madison School District is practically half of majority of District 2. And District 4, isn't it? You live in Madison, isn't it too? Yeah. So I think it's a big number of residents that they are, So I want to know the data, because that data could be, I don't know. We don't know exactly right now if Madison is going to go, but this is the bus, this is what they are planting the seed in the community, because I have been part of those communication discussion. So, and if they are doing it, I hope they are not doing what they are planning to do or they think to do it, but because it's going to be a big ask. So I don't know. So this is how I feel as a taxpayer if I need to go, and I have those two options right now.
So we were just looking at the school districts on the city website, and it does not have demographic data on it. So we'll have to work with our GIS coordinator to see what information can be gleaned from likely the Census Bureau or perhaps MMSD directly.
But would that change your opinion? Like looking at the demographics? I guess I appreciate your concern and I think it's legitimate, but I'm not. I wonder if that would change your opinion, because for me I don't know.
I don't vote, so.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, I don't.
So I can talk.
It's like a concern, but I don't know that it changes my
No,
calculus.
I know, but the other thing you need to think, you remember how this presidential election, we are going to be getting, like, I don't know how many mail-in per week. It's insane. So my other concern is when we send our flyer to talk about, go to vote for the referendum, those flyers are going to be, it's one of 20 that we are going to receive per week. You know what I mean? So that one is, if we are going to November, we need to do a lot of noise and be in front of the people so the people they know that there is a question about Fitchburg that they need to pay attention. Because that one is my other concern about this. You know what I mean? Like, so that's it. I don't vote, so, this is what I am telling you all of this, but, you decided, but.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're not an official. I mean, this isn't like an official vote, though, so your voice still matters in the conversation. It wouldn't change my opinion. I still would be in favor of a November referendum, and
Other thoughts? I mean, I think it's a tough decision. I think that's a bit. I don't think there's a good choice.
I think it changes approaches. Like, I think it's really still important information to collect, because to the mayor's point, if I was a parent and I was on the fence about funding 2 referendums, I would choose my kid's school over my city as well, right? But I think to that point, I don't know that it would change my vote, because I still think, Gabriella, to your point, philosophically, it's better to get more people on all sides of the political spectrum, and you're going to find that in November. Like, I think more of District 4 will turn out in November than they will in August, and I think you could probably say that for each district. But I think it's probably just going to affect our approach on like how we need to make sure, just how we approach messaging around it.
Do you feel like you have enough information from us? Or do you want more?
Well, we haven't
more-
heard from a couple of folks, but I think seemingly, at least certainly the majority who has spoken has preferred November. I think the vast majority of those who have spoken have preferred November.
That seems to be the. Anyone want to?
I'm still not sure, but I mean, there are compelling arguments on both sides. I mean, the higher voter turnout is obviously better. On the other hand, we're going to be playing our referendum against the Madison School District, and both of them are deserving. And, and we do have the additional burden of having to prepare 2 budgets. So there's the additional staff time. I'm not gonna hold up the show here.
So the COPS grant, is there any way to get an extension on that, or is that a totally like a hard date?
We don't know.
Is there a way that we can? I guess it would probably take a long time to get that answer.
I don't know how fast they would turn around an answer on that request. I mean, obviously, if we're leaning towards a November referendum, I think the message that we'll be relaying to the police department tomorrow morning, if they're not already watching currently, is that we're going to need them to reach out to the U.S., the federal government, and see what the possibility of getting an extension on that grant will be.
I'm going to make another comment because I don't vote. I think if we rejected that grant because we decided to go to November, so I don't think that we should never ask for many, many years for a grant again. So that's it.
But if the referendum passes because we go to referendum in November, we're able to hire more police officers. So it's like if we go to August and it fails, we don't hire them anyway. So it's like it's important that it passes, and it sounds like the evidence shows that the more turnout, the more likely it is to pass. So, but I mean, obviously, there's a lot of mitigating circumstances, but.
And of course, absent the grant funding, the city taxpayers would be on the responsibility for that 1/3 of funding if the grant could not be extended.
Can you remind us again, the total value of the COPS grant is $500,000 or $600,000?
I want to say, is it 670,000? 625.
Okay.
Thank you, Misty.
So it's 1 year, isn't it, that we are covered?
It's basically covering
1 year.
1 out of the first 3 years, yeah. And we're required to keep them on for at least 4 years, not like we would plan on terminating anyone, but there is that additional requirement.
But if the referendum passes, we are going to hire anyway, so.
Yes.
You know what I mean, so.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking in the grand scheme of things, if we're feeling a lot more confident about a November date, the 600,000 is 20% of 1 year of referendum. And it's basically, the referendum goes on forever.
Mm-hmm. But we can use that 625 to cover for other things.
Jay?
Yeah, just as another little point here, I'm not really convinced, even in the slightest degree, by the idea of referendum fatigue. I think a properly managed educational campaign can work through that and, provide information to people in a way that is not fatiguing. So, I heard that phrase a few times, and I don't buy it. I don't believe it. I think if we do things correctly, then we can overcome that.
Do we think there's data out there that can inform us one way or the other?
I doubt it. I doubt anybody's done an experiment that they could prove one way or the other.
There's probably never been this many referendums in a row, any time in any state.
It's clear the direction that school districts and municipalities are all trending. So, yeah, that's the unfortunate situation that we're all finding ourselves in.
Okay, I have another question. Do we know how many municipalities have done a referendum in August primary? Is something common or is uncommon?
I don't know. We'd have to
Okay.
look, see if we can get that information
Okay.
from like
So-
the Elections Commission.
Just curious, to see.
I think some of this call for data, though, is just we're trying to game a system. And we have to have confidence in our own ability to explain to our residents why this is necessary. I mean, it doesn't really matter what another municipality did or when they did it. What matters is, are we going to do this in a way that convinces our voters that this needs to be done? The whole idea just starts to sound like we're in a casino trying to place our bets in the right way so that we get the result that we're looking for. And I don't think that's the right way to approach this sort of question.
Okay, I am asking this question because when we make a decision, we should make it with data, this is the way I make my decision, and I don't think that I am asking any craziness. I am asking because I want to know what is the rate of success because of the, of those referendum going in August, because since I was able to vote since 2011, when I got my citizenship, I haven't seen a referendum in a August primary. So this is what I am asking.
Functionally, though, I just wonder, getting this information, I guess we'll have to have a discussion at the next council meeting to make a final decision on this, because if we're going to do it in August, we would need to vote by May 28th.
I don't vote.
Right? No, I'm just saying, if we want additional information before we make the decision, we have to have another conversation to make the decision after having gotten that, and that would have to happen at the next council meeting, or we have a special meeting to discuss the referendum. That's the only options we have on the table.
Well, okay, but that information is only one tiny piece of the equation about how a referendum gets passed. So to me, having that type of minutia doesn't really get us any closer to knowing what's going to happen. Like I said, I think the majority of this is going to be based on our conduct and the way we go about trying to sell this to the voters. And I realize that city staff can't really do that, and the pieces that city staff sends out or to the voters can't really advocate. We can only city staff can say, well, if we don't have this if this referendum doesn't pass, we're facing a shortfall. We'll probably have to cut staff. We aren't going to be able to hire additional police officers, blah, 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 blah. Factual information like that, the city staff can go ahead and put out there. But when it comes to actually going out and doing the political work to sell this, that's our job. We're the politicians. We're the elected people. And it's our job to go out there and in our day-to-day contacts with people, talk to them about why this is important. And maybe there will be some committee that forms that will spend money. That's what happened with the library. The library when the library referendum passed, there was a separate library committee that put out lit pieces advocating for the library to be funded. And so it was, I don't remember if it was the Friends of the Friends of the Fitchburg Library wasn't really, that hadn't really formulated yet. There was. No.
Right?
The city can't do it. It would have to be some independent groups. And I don't remember what it was called. That was too many years ago. I barely remember what happened yesterday. But that's one of the things that it's going to be up to us, and this is where it comes down to our confidence in ourselves to sell this to the people.
I do think additional data will help. I think data is better than anecdotes. And I think you can educate the public all you want if they don't have access to vote because they're on summer vacation, or if there's a lot of other contributing factors. And I do think, I don't know that it would change my opinion. I'd probably end up still thinking November is the right way to go. But I do think I just know how much work and how much planning and how much time we put in to the past referendum that we passed last year. And I think additional data would be great to understand an August turnout.
All right, so to move forward, do we have people that are solid November regardless of additional information? Or is everyone sort of wavering? Who would be like a solid November
Oh, sure.
regardless? Okay, I'm kind of leaning towards a solid November. It sounds like we're leaning towards a solid November. Just, yeah, I'm not.
What color do we make that on the map?
Yeah. Okay. Do we want to maybe talk and see if we have a discussion about this quickly at the next council meeting just to check in?
Do you mind asking if anyone's a solid August?
Is anyone a solid August?
I think I saw 5 hands that were, well, 4 hands that were a solid November and a 5th hand that was kind of a solid November.
Who's a solid August? Jim? It's okay.
I just want to see the process. If we're going to go to November, I just want to see the process and make sure that it's, something that's really going to work. I don't want to go to November, but we don't have a good process in place.
Okay,
so that's kind of like what I'm waiting for. And if we could wait till the next council meeting, we can put that together.
And we don't have Mueller's input either, which is unfortunate.
Adam has had their phase 3 document up on his laptop that identifies a typical outreach period that they recommend being 12 to 16 weeks. So 3 to 4 months is what they typically recommend.
But I have another question. In that 3, what is it? How many weeks you say? 3?
12 to 16 weeks or 3 to 4 months, basically.
3 to, okay. So that one is considered for, for population that only you reach out in only one language, or also include population that you need to reach out in 2 languages. That one could be, I don't know.
We're operating from the position now that any communications that go out will have both Spanish and English. So that should be factored in any sort of timeline that we're working with Miller moving forward. And that's been communicated to them.
Okay, good. Okay.
So can we add this to the agenda at council next time and maybe have some additional information shared and check in? Or does that sound like a...
Well, it seems like it's 5-3.
Yeah,
it was
so-
only. Bill. I'm like with Bill. I don't want to hold it up, but I just got concerned.
Yeah,
I'm okay with November. I'm
unsure.
I
plan the
Well, how about this? We obviously have some information that is being requested from a data perspective. I certainly can't guarantee what is going to be available, particularly if we can break down MMSD by just the Fitchburg residents, but we'll certainly see what we can get on that. We'll have the police department reach out to the federal government and see if they can get a response in a reasonable time as well. And we'll keep the council informed on that. But at this point in time, I think the direction is largely that, yes, the council desires to go to referendum, and it appears that the majority is in favor of a November referendum.
I have another question. If the council is already in favor for the referendum, why do we need to wait until August 27 to vote? Can we vote next?
We don't need to.
Can we
do
vote
not.
in May?
You can
done
vote
with this
at any point, and that was going to
Okay.
be my next question
Okay.
is how would you like staff to time out? Obviously, we'll present likely some additional information May 14th. But moving forward, if we are going to likely stick with a November referendum, at which month would you prefer to have a vote? So that we can make sure we have that stuff presented and available?
I think we vote in May.
I think we vote in
Let's
May.
just-
Yeah.
Let's make it happen
Yeah.
and start working on it. And that doesn't mean we start holding public meetings on June 1st, but I mean,
If we're
we
going to
can-
do it, let's
Yeah,
vote
I mean,
on it.
just get the vote out there. Let people know this is what we're intending. I mean, I don't see, this schedule still makes 0 sense to me.
It's just the last day. That's all
It's just the last day. We weren't saying that we should vote August
Okay,
28th. It was just the last day
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you could actually, on the 27th is the last day that council
But
could
then
vote.
you did have a September and October referendum education. So I think that needs to back up and start in July.
Yeah,
probably.
we'll discuss that once we get to it.
When will we vote on the wording? Because I know wording on the ballot item is incredibly important. Will that be something we vote on separately as opposed to timing, or will that wording come to council soon?
So it sounds like we'll continue this process and bring something forward with an actual question in May. We'll begin working with Ellers based upon the direction that we've gotten this evening to begin to prepare that question for the council to consider. And then, of course, we'll continue this conversation yet this evening as far as dollar amount and what you'd like to see included in said referendum as well.
Question is, when are we going to talk about the dollar amount?
Wait, one question at a time.
And it appears as though Missy has something she'd like to add.
Sorry, complications. So if we are doing a November election, the wording of the question does have to be different based on the values that come out in August. So we could have like a tentative plan of what we want to be included, but the actual question itself will have to be done after August 1st.
Also, just, I want to point out that we have contingency funding in the budget and like around 130,000, and we should think about extra staffing, temp staffing for the finance department if they're going to be putting together two budgets.
That one is coming late.
Yeah. Anyway, I just want to, we have the money, so we should start thinking about that too.
But I didn't understand what Misty said. Why?
We have to, we don't put the question until August.
Why?
We can decide on it ahead of time. We just can't submit it to the county until August 1st.
So the resolution that you'll end up approving is very statute-driven, specific language. And the language that's in there is based on the property values that are known as of the time the question is set. And I will get new data from the DOR in August. And so that August data is what we have to have on the question if we're going into the November election.
Okay, I don't get it.
All right, so we'll have a quick discussion at next council meeting.
All right, and then we'll now move on to dollar amounts and.
Oh, is that
you
what we're
might-
on next?
Well, I think if we certainly want to stay on a May timeline to potentially vote, then staff clearly needs to have that information and direction to move forward. So, yeah. I mean, I hate to extend it further, but I mean, staff
Yeah, it's important.
is not able to do anything other than collect data and come back in 3 weeks.
Okay, can I start?
Yeah.
Oh, you have. This is a question open. It's an open question.
I was just going to do,
Okay.
present again what, bring folks back up to refresh memories, what had been discussed previously in council, where we were looking at 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, and $40 a month based upon previous council requests. And you can see the various dollar amounts in the upper green row as it relates to each particular monthly dollar amount. And then if you look at the green row in the middle of that table, you can see what the overall yearly impact is on the average assessed home in the city of, single-family home in the city of Fitchburg, as well as what $500,000 home may look like. And then, of course, you can use the $100,000 increment above to kind of gauge based on where your home is currently assessed. Sure.
A question. I am looking at this document, and I don't see this number following this number here. They're rounded. No, but
Which document are you looking at?
this is the.
That was this. Is that the one from Ellers?
It's the survey.
The survey. So
Yeah,
it's
there was rounding that took place.
No, but
Yeah, they rounded to the nearest
299.
Yeah, so the $20 example is actually the 2.9,
No.
and then the 30 or the $25 is the 3.6.
$20.
Yeah.
Where?
2.8 is the second column. It's the same.
Oh, here. Okay. There. Okay, I got it.
Oh, good. Okay.
I mean, I guess just to start off the conversation, if the survey showed that currently, based on the survey results, that 2.9 million would pass, I'd say that that's probably the floor of what we should consider for the amount, since it seems like there's already support for that.
Yeah, and really, if we look at the survey results, we're talking probably about the $20 a month and somewhere potentially between there and the $25 a month
Yeah, somewhere
amount,
between
which was the 3.6 million.
2.9 and 3.6.
So the previous examples of what could be included in these amounts, the $2.2 million, which was a $16 a month amount, all of these options that you see, some of them you have already seen before, but they all contain what council has directed staff to include previously, that being a mix of both public safety and non-public safety, with the exception of this particular example, transit enhancements, and operating costs associated with the forthcoming police facility. Looking at the $2.9 million option, or approximately $20 a month, this is what would potentially, again, and this is a council obviously call as to what ultimately goes into this referendum. 5 police officers that were identified to be partially funded under the COPS grant program, 6 firefighters, which allows 2 firefighters to be added to each of the 3 shifts. Enhancements to east-west transit. We do have some updated numbers I want to point out in the right-hand column from Madison Metro that's estimating the city's cost to enhance east-west transit, which is specifically Route 65 and Route 75, is about $350,000 in annual increase in operating costs. And what that would get us is 7-day-a-week service on both of those routes with 45-minute headway during the daytime hours and a 90-minute headway in evenings and weekends. Includes police department facility operating costs, which also include the custodian position that would be needed for that building. And then it also includes additional positions that were identified in the Baker-Tilly organizational study, specifically the communication director position, a community services director position, a human resources talent specialist, and a public works finance specialist, as well as an increase in the paid on call, paid on premise fire department hourly rate to $15 an hour.
Can I ask you a question about that? Mm-hmm. Previously, when we had talked about east-west transit, what we were talking about was something that would essentially go from Southdale to Orchard Point. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't sound like what you just recited to us.
So if you look at the Metro Transit routes, the 65 generally runs from Southdale, actually goes all the way downtown at some point during that run, but does come through Rimrock, plus I think it's Route D that also serves Southdale neighborhood as well. And then the 65 goes basically from the northeast part of the city through Terra Vesa, down Lacey Road, East Sherrill Parkway, and then here to City Campus. And ultimately, if the city enhances that transit service, the intent would be is to connect 65 to the southernmost BRT stop, which is planned for McKee and Fish Hatchery. The 75 largely comes from downtown all the way down Fish Hatchery Road, out McKee Road, and then off to Epic in the city of Verona. So it would require a transfer to get from the northeast side of the city to the northwest side of the city, with that transfer spot likely being at the BRT stop at McKee and Fish Hatchery Road.
So this would get the 65 to that point?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And increase the frequency.
Yeah. So just for further backstory on the conversation that's been had with Metro, the initial options that were presented largely included a financial contribution from the city of Verona to make that happen, and also to have a higher level of service frequency and headway. And ultimately, city staff requested Metro to provide us with options that rely solely upon Fitchburg-based funding that result in 7-day-a-week service. We didn't necessarily feel it was appropriate to obligate perhaps the city of Verona to spend whatever available levy they may have, if any, to facilitate the transit enhancements in the city of Fitchburg. So ultimately, the best combination of service and cost ultimately ended up to be approximately $350,000 For example, if we were to do 7-day-a-week service with 45-minute headway at all times, that's going to be approximately $475,000 annually in additional transit costs, just as a comparison. And of course, if we drop down to less than 7-day-a-week service, the cost would, probably drop into the $200,000, somewhere in there. Any other questions on this particular example? Moving on to the $3.6 million example, this is what you would see here. The positions that I've already mentioned above the paid-on-call increase in hourly rate. And then this was the example previously presented to council of what could be included in addition to what had been in the $20 a month option, and that would be 2 police lieutenants, an HR generalist, a budget analyst, and a nutrition site coordinator. Recognizing the survey results likely put us somewhere between 2.9 million and 3.6 million. City staff offer now a couple of new examples for you to consider. Again, there's flexibility, obviously, in what the council ultimately wishes to include in the referendum question, but a $24 a month impact on the average residential or on all houses would be a $3.4 million referendum. Again, that would look to have 5 police officers, 6 firefighters, east-west transit enhancements, facility operating costs, the aforementioned communications director, community services director, HR specialist, public works finance specialist, the increase to $15 an hour, 1 police lieutenant, 1 fire department battalion or division chief, and 1 budget analyst. And then an additional option at $3.2 million. Or $23 a month, basically in this example removes the budget analyst and retains the lieutenant and the battalion chief.
Can you go back to the last one? I guess the one before. Yeah.
But we can adjust those
Absolutely.
positions. Okay.
So this one at 3.6 million, you've got 2 police lieutenants, but the 3.4 million and the 3.2 million have 1 police lieutenant and 1 fire battalion. Why is that?
This was the example that was obviously presented early on in the conversation. We've continued to focus our efforts on what's been identified in the Baker-Tilly study. And one of the things that was identified in the Baker-Tilly study was that battalion chief position in the fire department. So that's why that's been put back into these other dollar amounts. And perhaps that should have been included in this particular amount originally. Although I think, if I recall correctly, we were bumping up against funding issues at $3.6 million to keep it at $25 a month, and we had the halftime or 0.6 position with the nutrition site coordinator, because if we included the battalion chief at that point, it would have pushed us probably to $26 or $27 a month potentially.
So if in this example, how does a police lieutenant compare to a battalion chief in salary, in wages?
It's about a $20,000 difference between the 2 positions, with the police lieutenant being higher.
So if in this example we traded one of the lieutenants for a battalion chief, we could lower this by $20,000.
Correct.
Bill, did you have a question?
Yeah, I guess just a point of clarification. Since we're leaning towards strongly going on the November ballot, which means there's a much higher probability we're going to have to forego the COPS grant. That top line item there says 5 police officers, and because the word COPS is there, it seems like we're saying that's driving the number 5, but that's not necessarily the case, right? Like, regardless of whether we get the grant, we should still have 5 officers.
Well, of course, ultimately that's a common council call. The reason being that it's listed this way is because back in December, when the grant was presented to council after recently having been awarded to the city, is the resolution indicated that 5 police officer positions would be included in any potential referendum that moved forward. So that's why we currently have it set at 5. But of course, that that could be increased or whatever the council chose to do with it.
Can we also say that those police officers are going to be community officers? I will feel more comfortable with that.
That's my recollection, that the grant was written with the emphasis that
They are community officers.
I don't recall if it was all 5, but certainly I think at least 3 of the 5 were going to be community-based, if not all 5. I'd have to refresh my memory on that.
Yeah, I think we need to be sure that they are community officers.
I have a question. So Greg talked about the budget gap that we're going to face. And does this money can't cover that budget gap?
You can write the question in such a way that the budget gap could be covered, but it would obviously take away some of the positions that are included or other service enhancements.
Yeah.
If the city ultimately is able to get the grant, obviously the funding that we're not spending on the police officer positions that's grant funded could potentially help offset that for a year or two, but it's certainly not going to cover that identified gap. I mean, at the end of the day, these are all increasing the capacity of the city based upon its needs related to growth and so forth in many of its existing departments, and then obviously enhancing some existing services, namely transit, and then to cover the added cost of the police facility, which, and I should add, we already are in the process of engaging Ellers to complete that impact study for the police services facility. So we will have something coming to council in the coming months that will identify what that study reveals as what we are able to assess for future development driving the police services facility.
So if we pass a referendum, we're compelled to carry out exactly what we say? We can't change course after the fact?
It depends on how the question is written.
Okay, all right.
I was about to say, I think that's going to be the important part of we put, including things such as in our referendum question, and again, I don't know if school board is different, but we were able to kind of apply it to all operating expenses. We might not have that leeway here, but I'd be interested to understand how far we could push that to give the city flexibility.
Sure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The police facility, operating cost, did you adjust it to the new footage? Because that one is for 74,000.
That actually has been adjusted
really?
with an estimated cost, and I am keenly aware that still has to be determined. Yeah. Right now, we've just used a placeholder amount of $40 million on the figure to assess what the estimated operating impact will be. And again, I want to point out that out of that 487, approximately 100,000 is a custodian building maintenance position, and the rest is operating costs associated with utilities, maintenance, pest control, those sorts of things, and then of course building mechanicals, repair and replacement.
But
yeah.
But if we're thinking to geothermal and solar, more sustainable feature, I will say that the utility cost is going to be,
Yeah, that's certainly possible.
Possible. It's going to be reduced. That considerably
it's certainly
lower
possible.
than
Yeah, we're not sure for the purposes of the estimate that we've prepared exactly how that may positively impact it. So we obviously want to be conservative in our estimates so that the council is not surprised.
Bill?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how much, as we're looking at these lists, how tight is this? I'm just thinking, if the referendum is roughly $3 million and inflation is 3.5%, after 1 year, we're losing $100,000 worth of buying power, which basically means one FTE we'd have to cut after 1 year.
That is a very valid point, and it's something that the council can consider is much to Alder Vafadari's statement, is consider having some money in the question that would be allowed just to close that gap, if you will. Yeah, well, I guess I'm wondering, as we look at these lists,
is this exactly what it would buy in 2024/2025? And, or is there any buffer in here?
I can answer this. So no, we've already factored in some inflation as part of these numbers. So this is a 2025 number we applied a 5% inflation factor to that from the 2024 numbers. So we've tried to build that in a little bit at least.
Any thoughts? I guess I'll just start off by saying that this list is very attractive. I see the need for all of these things in the, but it's, I do wonder if your options at 23, 24 might be a little bit more safer. I do think a budget analyst is important, and the difference between bringing it back down to even further eliminating that budget analyst makes a difference for me in terms of the list of staff that we're able to do.
Well, since we're talking about specific positions, to me, the nutrition site coordinator is vital. They've been struggling down there for years, and to the point where there was money found that it wasn't spent to hire a part-time person for this year. So, I mean, there's just so many things. And so, I mean, HR definitely needs a position. I don't know if the talent specialist is more important than the other HR position that was up there. I don't know. Go back to the 3.6 million. The HR generalist, I don't know which of those two positions is more important.
We've consulted with the HR director, and she's identified the talent specialist as being a higher priority than the generalist. And in fact, her most recent indication to us is that the generalist is not a priority at this time.
So the talent specialist is kind of like a recruiter, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And can we outsource that instead of having any staff person? I don't know.
Well, consultants that do that kind of work are a lot more expensive than hiring this person, I'm sure. If they can find us a lot of police officers, though, maybe that would help.
Any thoughts?
I would just wager I'd be interested to hear from the marketing and communications team. I know it's weird and nuanced, but what numbers would really resonate with voters? If $24 a month versus $20, I think a lot of this is going to be messaging as well. I would hate to go with a $23 a month to try and get that 3.2 when if we could craft our messaging around it's just $24 a month, it's less than $1 a day, and you get all these services, right? I would just be interested in that weigh-in from those experts as well.
It's less than 3 cups of Starbucks a month.
Right, you kind of have that messaging that can sometimes resonate with people.
Yeah, that's certainly one way that will likely be utilized to help message, but I also think it's important, and I know our consultant has felt the same way, that identifying the overall annual impact is going to be equally important as well, just from a matter of transparency to the voting public of what the overall annual impact is.
So let's talk about real life instead of the theoretical. Misty, let's say we go with one of these options, and then we go and hire all these positions, and we still have this 560,000 or so shortfall for 2025. What do we do?
So it's not uncommon during the financial management plan process that Ellers helps us with to have a levy gap, because it is based on broad brush assumptions, 5%, 3% flat, it's all just very broad. And then by the time the budget details get worked out, those numbers start to kind of work themselves out. So 500,000 is a scary number. I won't say that it's going to be easy to do it, but that's not uncommon for recent years. The $1 million number was very scary, though, so I don't think the problem's going to go away, even if this referendum passes.
1.3 million in which year? 1.5? 5 years from now? So-
maybe maybe by that time, maybe we can implement like a tax wheel, you know what I mean? So that one we can cover some of the road cost and allocate that road cost that we budget every year for cover the gap, you know what I mean? Could be another option.
Or maybe we could have a new legislature that would pass some different laws that would allow us to manage the city the way we should.
Or shared revenue.
Yeah.
$7.1 billion budget surplus last year. That could all go to the municipalities and solve a lot of these problems, but they are, yeah.
Oh, the other option is not, I am not sorry. You are not going to like it what I'm going to say, so no.
So what is the action specifically that city staff, you both need weigh in on which of these numbers?
Yeah, it would be helpful if you could provide
Sure.
direction on which of these, I think, 4 options you would like us to focus our efforts on.
But then we can shift some of the stuff if we don't agree with 1 or 2 of those stuff, and maybe we can bring one from the other list to here. We can do that.
Yeah, there's
Okay,
flexibility.
okay.
Yep. And we can certainly send these items to you, so you can maybe take a look at those again. And I would encourage everyone to take a look at the Baker-Tilly study again as well. Like I said, we've really tried to focus on these options that are currently in front of you on the Baker-Tilly study because obviously that was done recently, and we hope has relevance and validity to our voting public.
Can you put that 3.61 back up there?
Can you include that study in the email as well, Chad?
Say that again, please.
Can you include that study in the email as well when you send these? Thank you so much.
So, Misty, can I just get your view on one other thing? Because you and I had a conversation several months ago where you suggested that we should probably add something in the referendum to deal with this potential budget shortfall. I realize I'm asking you to answer a question without the appropriate data that you aren't going to have till August. But if we go this route without including some money for that, is that okay? I mean, will you be able to make this work?
Yeah, so okay is relative, of course, right? So
Yeah.
I think the hard part is we will continue to have a hard time maintaining our status quo based on current levy limits. So if we don't address this through the referendum, the ongoing costs and the inflation Alder Jester keeps talking about is something we will have to continue to address if there's not other options. This referendum, though, at least would get the additional staff that we're looking at not have to be absorbed by status quo. So it does make a significant impact on the budget and will help set us up for the future. But it's not going to make future budgets easy by any means, even if we input some money for status quo in there.
We don't hire you to do the easy.
Right. It's a continual math problem, right? The revenues go up this and expenses go up this. And so there will always be a gap as long as we're restricted.
Well, let me make a very specific recommendation, and that is this option seems to address the needs that are most critical right now. I don't really feel comfortable moving forward with something that doesn't include the bulk of this stuff. So what I would like to do is see an option that includes that is this option with 1 police lieutenant, 1 battalion chief, and without the HR generalist, and see where we're at. No, that one was different. The one that he had up there was different.
We'll look up at the cost here for the generalist, and that'll give at least a rough idea. And I don't know if the other document we're working on will help us make that calculation real quick.
And then while we're doing that, see if there's enough. I like the idea of $25 a month. 25 is an easy number to deal with. It's $300 a year. We're not dealing with $296 or some stupid number like that. And obviously, that only applies to somebody who has the typical $318,000 house. But it's we can talk about it in a very general sense that way. But I'd like to see what we have within that $25 a month left over that could be applied to dealing with this budget shortfall.
So the previous difference between the salary and benefits for a lieutenant versus a battalion chief was approximately $20,000, and the salary and benefit cost for the HR generalist is about $130,000. So a total of about $150,000 would be left there under this example.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm generally in the 3.4 to 3.6. I think if we're going to go to referendum, I'd rather go on we need these positions. So, and it's within it's based on the referendum support numbers that we saw. If some of those undecideds break towards us and the people that are sort of in the lower end understand the need, I could see us getting building support for this amount of money.
I will be cautious about that because they mentioned that one is the number that the referendum can fail. So I will be cautious about you guys.
Right, they were saying stick on the closer to 2.9 than 3.6.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't know. This is my concern. Yes, we want all of that. It will be great, but we need to find a number that we are sure that is going to pass.
Yeah, I saw Rob shaking his head. Rob, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, it's I agree that the closer to 2.9 is the safer number for a ballot at the moment. The number 3.6, I believe the Scott slide he had up was, if that were on the ballot today, you'd see about 48% support, which is just outside, I believe, your margin of error. So that would be a coin flip right now if you did 3.6. So I think your confidence would certainly go up to closer to 2.9, and 2.9 was at 56 and outside of your margin of error. So I get a little more nervous the closer to 3.6 that you get. And we've just seen, God, if you could rewind the clock 5 years ago, we used to see about 1/3 of undecideds move towards yes. Now I usually say about a quarter. If I look at April, our numbers were actually more predictive when we included 0 undecideds moving towards yes, as opposed to even a quarter. So it's too early to tell what that percentage is, but I've become a lot more conservative in terms of how many undecideds I think will break towards yes. But I think the long answer to a short question is support was higher when the number was 2.9 as opposed to 3.6, and you got outside the margin of error.
Thanks, Rob. That's a good point.
So with that information, would the council prefer us to focus on perhaps something like this, or where's the $20? Sorry about that, as I'm making everyone ill. Sorry.
I lean towards 3.2. Can you show that?
Yeah.
That's almost 3.3.
Yeah. That would be my preference.
I would agree with Joe.
So 3.2 to 3.3 million in that range?
2.9 to 3.2. I think it was the bow. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, yes.
Yeah.
If we just say the number 3.2, let's see what happens to Rob and Scott. Do they start cringing or?
Well,
No. No.
I'm more interested in what this actually buys us, because there are needs that we have that aren't going to go away.
A failed referendum buys us nothing, though.
That's right.
Well, I get
That's
that.
right.
So I get that. So the question is, do we have confidence in ourselves to be able to go out there and sell this?
I don't know that that's the only question. Right. I think it's a fair question. I don't think it's the only question.
I just want to go back to the point that that renters were more likely to support a higher amount, so maybe that may mean increased outreach in apartments. Renters, according to the survey, were more tolerant for a higher amount. So I would say if we're going to do outreach, that we do some targeted outreach to apartments so that renters are aware of the referendum and are more likely to turn out.
And renters make up about 50% of the city's, right?
Correct, and they were only 15% of the respondents. So I think that there would need to be a concerted effort to do voter outreach in apartments.
It's an important point. Yeah.
I can't say for certain that 50% of the population is in rents versus owns, but about, I think, 52% or so of the housing units are rental versus ownership. So there obviously could tend to be more people living in owned houses. Those households could be bigger, if you will. So I don't have that information exactly how it breaks out. We'd have to check census to see if that identifies.
But it's certainly closer to 50-50 than 1585.
I want to repeat again, is we want a referendum. If we are going to do all of this, we should do it. We want this referendum to be successful. I don't want to, risk all the work and all we're doing if we, if we say, oh, we need to go and, yes, there are a lot of needs. I agree with you, Jay. I wish we can hire all these people. But I agree with Bill, is we need a successful referendum. It does, whatever we get, we are going to be in better position. If we are the 2.9 or 3.3, we are going to get more stuff. And it's a win already, you know what I mean? But I am concerned that we push that envelope to a higher number, that then we get our hands empty.
Well, keep in mind that we also had $5 million options and $8 million options. So there's a lot of stuff that we need that we're not even close to addressing with this. At $23 a month versus $25 a month, that's $24 a year. So,
but it depends the value of your home too, because you say it's a $300 a year, but you live in a $300,000 home, but you live in a,
Of course it does. That's not the point here.
No.
I mean, the point is we're talking about a pretty minimal amount, and if you're living in a $700,000 house, then you can probably afford to pay a bit more.
All right, this is all speculation. Do you feel like you have enough? Do you need a number? Or is this enough? Is a 2.9 to 3.2 range, 2.9 to 3.3 range, is that okay to move forward? Because
if that's the direction that the majority of the council is wishing for us to go, certainly, yeah. And I think you can kind of see, what you have here. I mean, it's a pretty narrow range between 3.3 and 2.9. We're really talking about one or two positions here potentially, is really what it ends up to be. So 1, 2, or 3, depending on how you look at it. So ultimately, are we on the right path here from a staffing and inclusion perspective related to what's in the referendum? Obviously, we still need to potentially address the funding gap, so to speak, and if there's a mention of that in the question. And I think from what I've heard right now, it would probably be wise for us to work with Ellers to include that in the question so that gives the council flexibility. But I would, enjoy hearing direction on that too.
I would agree with that direction.
Yep. Yes.
I think we have what we need at this point. Appreciate the conversation and information. It was helpful. We'll begin working on collecting the data we mentioned, focusing in on these 2.9 to 3.3 range, and then working to start drafting a question and look to be back in May. in regards to that. And then, Mayor, we may want to talk about the timing of that if the council has a strong desire to keep this on a May timeframe, if you want to do a direct referral, or if you'd prefer to do a traditional referral as well. I don't think you have to answer now, but I think ultimately, just for the council's consideration that, we may need to talk about that if the council wants to have a vote in May in particular.
Okay, we can move on. I don't know if Valerie is still here to do the next agenda item. Do you feel like you can do an overview of council resources? Yeah. Can we do agenda item C first? She's just walking from her office. Okay. So the next item on the agenda is discussion of public records law and open meetings law, ethics and Robert's rules by our city attorney, Valerie Zisman. Fortunately, both of our new members have extensive experience with this because they serve on boards that deal with these issues. So fortunately, we have an experienced group here, and I hope that we can possibly move through this relatively quickly. Scott, do you have a presentation, Valerie? Are you going to attach through the HDMI? Are you going to attach through the... Okay, we're going to try it. We're having issues. We're having tech issues, but...
Do we require a short recess? Not yet.
We're gonna see how it goes.
Just trying to be preemptive.
Yeah.
You can talk at like 1.5x.
I have a tendency to speak fast. Yeah. So
And I don't know if
that will work to my advantage tonight.
And I don't know if you heard, but both of our new members have served on boards that deal with these.
That's fantastic.
So there's experience across the board.
You could
across the
probably
council.
high level Robert's rules.
I have one.
Yeah.
I think you have one too.
Are we on break right now?
No.
I forgot that.
How was your adventure in circuit court yesterday?
It was good.
Good.
All right. Can I get a motion
So
to recess?
moved.
Seconded.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are recessed.
Now we're on break.
Okay. Can I get a motion to reconvene?
Moved.
Second.
All in favor of reconvening, say aye.
Aye.
We are back in session. Valerie, can you go ahead and start?
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I will take note that you've been here for quite a while as I've been following along your meeting from the comfort of my office. So I will try to keep my presentation fairly brief. I do want to cover a few topics. And I want to start by making sure that you understand what my role here in the city is. Most of you already know me, but for those new members on the council, as well as a reminder to the members who've been here for quite some time, I'm the city attorney, and it is my job to represent the city in its in my legal capacity and its in legal issues that may arise for the city. So that includes extending legal advice to you as members of the council, as well as department heads, the city administrator, the mayor, etc. I represent the city on city business. I can't represent any of you individually, so if you have personal issues or campaign questions, that's not something I can help you with. Lastly, I just want to make sure that you remind for most of you and let you know for those for whom this might be new, I provide advice. I don't enforce any of these laws. So if you come to me with a question, I'm happy to provide my guidance if I'm able to do that. But I don't do any enforcement. So a lot of these types of things like public records, open meetings are enforced either by the Department of Justice or the District Attorney's Office. So as well as issues relating to ethics for local officials. So I'll start and I'll move kind of quickly as requested. I'll speak quickly as well. If I'm talking too fast, let me know to slow down. And if you have any questions, I would just ask that you ask the council president to recognize you, unless you're running it more informally, and that's fine too. Feel free to interrupt. As far as I'm concerned, that's not a problem. As you all are aware, in Wisconsin, there's an open meetings law. It exists in many states, and there's a federal version as well, known as the Freedom of Information Act. But ultimately, it requires all meetings of governmental bodies to be noticed and to be open and reasonably accessible. And there are some exceptions to that requirement, such as closed sessions, but those have to be specifically authorized by state statute. Again, noticed and open and reasonably accessible, those are the requirements for the open meetings. And the idea behind the open meetings law is that it is beneficial for a democratic government to have an electorate that is informed and is able to participate fully in the affairs of government. So that's laid out in the state statute. The state law also says that this law is to be broadly interpreted, and I think that's an important reminder for everybody, broadly interpreted to promote the policy of openness. So in other words, when there's some question of how it should be decided, a court is likely going to generally err in favor of more openness, not less. Courts disfavor any interpretation that allows governmental entities to evade that policy of openness. So in other words, we're not getting by on technicalities here. Courts really do tend to, when they make decisions in cases like these, to really err on the side of open government. So when does the open meetings law apply? It applies to meetings of governmental bodies. So a governmental body is a state or local agency or a board or commission, council, etc., as well as subcommittees and boards that are created by the council, such as the many boards, commissions, and committees that exist in the city. And a meeting is a convening of members of said governmental body, and this is important, for the purpose of exercising the responsibilities, authority, and power or duties delegated to it. So in other words, it's a meeting to discuss the governmental business. So again, there's a two-part test. There's a purpose and a numbers requirement. Most of you probably remember me talking about this last year or have heard this in other places. So the question becomes, what is the purpose of the meeting? And are there enough members present to determine the body's course of action? If both of those two parts are met, then you've got an open meeting, and then those requirements of openness and notice and accessibility apply. So conducting governmental business is an expansive legal concept. It's not limited to formal or final decision making. So preliminary decisions, discussions, information gathering, these all fall into the category of governmental business. Direct interaction among the members is not required. As far as the numbers, the question becomes how many members have to gather to constitute a quorum of a meeting. And the answer to that is a sufficient number to determine the course of action of that body. This question can be tricky. This is one of the areas that, of this law that can get kind of tricky because it doesn't always mean a majority of the body. And I should also mention and differentiate, when we talk about in our ordinance that 6 alders will constitute a quorum, that's the number required to convene a meeting. But when we talk about quorum in the context of the open meetings law, we're talking about the number of members of the body that can determine a course of action. In other words, that can decide whether something passes or fails. So many times it'll just be the majority because that's how a lot of matters get adopted. But sometimes a course of action can be to deny or to block something from happening. And in some situations, like for instance, a budget amendment, 3 alders can block an amendment from passing, and so 3 alders can determine the outcome of an action. In that case, that would be sufficient to constitute a quorum. So that number can be complicated, and I've had this question before. I know we had a discussion about this last year. I'll keep it fairly brief, and I'm happy to discuss. I should probably have mentioned this at the beginning. Any of these topics, anytime, let me know if you have follow-up questions. It doesn't have to be tonight. Because a lot of these kinds of issues tend to be fact-specific. But there are situations where only 3 alders, or potentially I could come up with hypotheticals, where only 2 alders could potentially constitute a quorum. That would be pretty rare. But the thing that I want to do is just make sure that I put it on your radar that when many of you gather and you're talking about city business, the more of you there are, the more likely you are to meet that definition of a meeting, and that meeting should be noticed. One question that comes up is, have the members convened? And by that I mean, what constitutes a convening of members? So back before, the very common use of social media, of text messaging, of email, when people weren't gathered in person, they usually would send letters or make phone calls. When it came to letters, and I mean traditional snail mail letters, there's some opinions from the Department of Justice that say that generally letters probably won't constitute a meeting. And the idea there is that the communication spread over time. It is generally a one-way communication, but even if there's a back and forth, it is so spread out over time that it's not really a meeting. Telephone conference calls, and especially in this day and age, Zoom conferences, video conferences, as well as email and other instantaneous messaging can permit instantaneous communication. And so if the purpose, to discuss governmental business and the numbers test are met, then it is likely to be found a meeting. If you come to me with a question and you ask me, Valerie, what do you think about this type of situation? Do we have a problem here? The best I can do in most cases, because again, these are so fact specific, is say, here's where the problem may be, and here's how I think a court might interpret it. Many of these types of situations that arise are different than the situations that have been decided by the courts in the past, and ultimately it would only be a circuit court judge that would make the determination that yes, you violated the law, or no, you didn't. And so, with every situation, we really have to consider all of the facts that are involved, what you're meeting for, how many of you there are, etc. I do want you to be really aware of the fact that when you're sending a group text message, or if you're communicating on another electronic communication medium, such as instant messaging or social networking, you may be convening a meeting if you're discussing city business and if there are enough of you involved in that communication, it's instantaneous. I don't know that there's been a case decided on that, but there have been opinions from the Department of Justice that say this potentially does open kind of the door to an electronic virtual meeting, if you will. There's also the concept of walking quorum. You're mostly probably familiar with it. I'll keep this brief. The idea is that you can't separate and you can't dole out the meeting into small bits, but have the same idea traveling from person to person to avoid open meetings. In other words, if one of you calls one other person, has a meeting, and then in a kind of intentional fashion, then calls another member, communicates what's been communicated to the first alder, and then comes to a conclusion, and then continues on walking down sort of a kind of like if you used to play the telephone game as a child. You can't do that in order to avoid open meetings. So again, if you're meeting the numbers, even if they're separate, each gathering is smaller, but together there's an agreement to act uniformly, and there's a sufficient number to control the body, that could be a walking quorum. Again, very fact-specific and complex, so if you have a potential situation where this might arise, come talk to me. So there are requirements, as I mentioned, that meetings be noticed. Staff will handle notices for you. And so the big thing to remember there is that if we don't know about a meeting, we can't notice it. Otherwise, the clerk's department takes care of those notices for the Common Council. And so one thing you should probably know is that if you think you'll be attending a meeting where other council members are going to be present, then work with city staff to determine if there's a need for a notice. And by that I mean not a council meeting. We know that, we're assuming that you all are going to be here. But if several of you are planning to attend another meeting of either a Fitchburg body or a different organization or body, and there's a potential for that potential quorum, then we can notice it accordingly. We just need to know that it's happening. So the takeaway here is that you want to limit the discussion of city business to city meetings. These are discussions that are worth having. I don't want to discourage you from having honest and open and frank conversations with each other, but largely, these are the kinds of conversations that should be happening here in this room, and they should be accessible to the public. If you think you'll be attending an event with other members, let staff know. Be mindful of quorum, negative quorum, and walking quorum. If there's a communication coming from staff that's going to the mayor and council list, try to avoid replying to everybody, depending on what the content of that reply is, of course. But generally speaking, avoid reply all unless you really thought about it and think it's necessary. And then one other item I want to mention is that because of this notice requirement, you do really want to be careful about what is being discussed at a council meeting. If there's something, a non-agenda item that comes up that, for instance, somebody comes in to comment on, it's fine to listen to that person talk, and if you want to ask a follow-up question from them, that's okay too. But ultimately, if you want to have a broader, in-depth discussion of that topic, then that's something that we should add to the agenda for the following meeting or some subsequent meeting instead of having an in-depth discussion at that time. So just work with staff to get that on the agenda if that's what you want to do. So, any questions on that? Great. I'll keep cruising along. Am I talking too fast? I can do faster. All right. So, public records law, just to touch on that. Again, the purpose is to keep the workings of government transparent and accessible to the public. And that includes the acts of public officers as well as its employees. It's to assist the members of the public to become a better informed electorate, and it provides public oversight. So public records requests, when they're received, they're forwarded to the records custodian. And then we conduct a search for the records, and then if they're reviewed, are there statutory or common law exceptions? Is there a balancing test that would prevent it from being disclosed? And then ultimately the records are released to the requester with a letter that explains any redactions or anything that was denied, any portion of it that's denied. So the definition of a record is fairly broad. It's right there on the screen. I won't read it to you, but it includes a lot of things such as pictures, videos. This presentation, for instance, would be a public record, etc. So a lot of things, it's not just letters or just emails, other types of records would be included in that definition. What's not included are drafts, notes, and preliminary documents, published materials available for sale or at the library, purely personal property, and material with limited access rights such as copyrighted and patented information. So if it's something, again, the list is up there. The things I want to highlight is things that are a record. You can read this full description. Well, I shouldn't say full, but fairly comprehensive. But I do want to point out that personal emails, if they're on your work account, are a record. They likely wouldn't be disclosed because under the balancing test, they would not be disclosed, but they are technically a record. Business emails, so in other words, governmental emails on your personal accounts are also a record, and they are subject to disclosure. Likewise, social media, contractors' records, police, body camera, etc., all different types of records. So if the email is sent on your city account, it will be a record, even if it's a personal email. So but again, disclosure generally wouldn't be required. So just be mindful of that. And my advice generally is keep your personal email on your personal account and use your city email for your city communication. It will make your and our clerk's department life much easier. You are custodians of your own records. But if you use your city account to conduct your city business, then when a public record comes in, or public record request comes in, it will be much easier for city staff to conduct that type of search. If the materials are on your personal email accounts or your text messages on your personal phone, that's not really something that IT can help you with, but you do bear the responsibility of complying with that record request. So again, to the extent you can limit all your communication to city accounts, that's really the way to go. It's the content of the email and not the format. So in other words, it doesn't really matter so much how you communicate. What matters is what's in that communication that's going to really determine whether something is a record or not. As I mentioned, you're custodians of your own records, and so if you want city staff to use city resources to process public records requests, and the clerk can tell you they are time-consuming and in many ways can be at times overwhelming, but we have software and staff to do it. You really don't want to find yourself trying to dig through however many years of your text messages or your personal email accounts, and potentially finding yourself in a situation where you don't remember the password to your email because you switched accounts, but there may be some responsive records there. So use your city email. That's my big pitch to you for the night. If you walk away with only one thing, I hope it's not just one thing, but use your city email. That will help. So, questions on that? Well, I say this every year, so I will tell you as well. So it's a bit of a joke, but it's only half joke. Dance like no one's watching, and email as if your words one day will be read aloud in a room full of lawyers during a deposition. Again, only half joking because we've had those types of situations. Just be mindful of what you put in an email as far as, how your joke or your tone might come across. It doesn't always translate very well when read aloud without the context that it might be coming from. So just keep that in mind. And with that, any questions on that? So most of the information that came, that's in this presentation, comes from the Department of Justice Office of Open Government. They also put together the Public Records and Open Meetings guides that are in your materials. I think you either did or will receive. It's a really large packet, but if you go to their website, you can search it as a PDF. So just keep in mind it's a great resource. That said, I'm also a resource and I'm here for you. You don't need to search the PDF. You can call me, and I'm happy to assist you with any kind of questions that you might have relating to these issues or any other city business for that matter. I'm just going to touch on conflicts and ethics just a little bit. The big takeaway here, and most of you will hopefully be familiar with this, it shouldn't be news. You can't use your position, your public position, or your office to obtain anything of financial gain or anything of substantial value for private benefit of yourself or your immediate family or an organization with which you're associated with. So, translation, you can't use your role as an alder, as an elected official, or as a mayor to benefit yourself financially or otherwise, or those close to you. There's also so that came from state law. There's also some ordinances in Fitchburg, and you can read, and they're in your materials, so I won't take up any more of your time, but they address incompatible activities. So you can see that, and then there's also the disclosure of information where you're prohibited from disclosing information that you might obtain by virtue of your position, or, for example, during a closed session, if there's confidential information that's shared. This ordinance addresses non-disclosure of that. There's also an ordinance on gifts and favors. The big takeaway is similar to the state law that we talked about, is that you shouldn't be accepting any gifts from folks because of your position in the city. So, the example I like to give is if a developer is offering you, however many rounds of golf or an all-expense paid trip to Hawaii to discuss some business, bad idea. If you're at Costco and they're handing out samples to everyone and not just to alders, go for those samples. And at Costco, you can have more than one, I know.
With this one, is there like a dollar amount? Because I know, like, what if somebody wanted to buy like coffee, we were meeting or something like that? Is that acceptable?
A nominal amount of food and beverage may be acceptable, but I would recommend you pay your own tab, generally speaking. Okay. Just because even the perception of that conflict is not something that you really want. There is specifically in our ordinances an event attendance ordinance, and I was just about to talk about that. And that, essentially we adopted that to make it clear that events that are really in the public's interest for alders and staff to attend, and that's ribbon cuttings, grand openings, seminars, workshops, conferences, appreciation lunches. So we can accept gifts and beverages, gifts of nominal value and beverages at events like that. But if it's just a developer that's buying you coffee, I would turn that down and pay for your own coffee.
Is the converse also true that we shouldn't be buying anyone else something of more than nominal value?
Well, I guess it kind of depends on the context. You're allowed to buy your friend's lunch.
Well, our friends, but what if my friend happens to be a developer who I'm trying to woo to the city?
I don't know that that creates as much of a concern we'd want to discuss kind of the facts and seeing what's going on and whether that developer's has active business and what else you have going on. But generally speaking, the concern here is that you're using someone else's money for your financial benefit. So that's the bigger concern there.
And just to clarify, like, so because we're elected officials, like that hat never comes off, right? So like the perceptual is always there no matter until we're no longer in office. Like even if that's a friend or something like that you're meeting with, if they're buying you coffee, like somebody else could see it and say, oh, well, you were with Olive Dancler and we weren't even talking about anything related to business, but it's still, the perceptual is still bad in that case. Is that what you're saying?
Well, potentially, if you have a long-standing relationship with somebody who happens to also do business in the city, that can get complicated quick. And so let's talk about that, and we can talk about that offline. Generally speaking, if your cousin or your friend is buying you coffee, but they also might have a contract with the city, if they're your cousin, they're not in your immediate family. But again, as you can see, these things get really complicated quickly. So fact specific, generally, rule of thumb is don't accept gifts that you're accepting by virtue of your office.
Gotcha.
So if it's not because of your office, if it's not because you're an alder, it doesn't have to be just the Costco example. If you're at a bank and they're giving away squishy cows to everybody who enters, and you were invited as an alder, but the public was also invited, there's no problem with taking the stress ball or whatever else they might be giving out that day. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So in summary, Chapter 14 of the Fitchburg Ordinance is also in your materials. There may be a time that might come that you might want to recuse yourself because of a conflict of interest. So for instance, let's say your cousin has a landscaping company and now their contract is before the council because they decided to bid on it. You might want to recuse yourself because you don't want to participate. Or it's a company that you're associated, or you're on the board of a nonprofit and you're either director or on the board there and they're applying for grant money or something like that. So there may be a situation where you might want to recuse yourself because of a conflict. If you do that, you should abstain from all of the discussion and not just from voting. So you really don't want to participate in any part of it. In fact, if you know you might have a conflict early on, you might not even want to participate in the approval of, let's say, if there's an RFP that's being approved that will go out that somebody might bid on. If you can foresee that far out, I would really take myself out of that as well. There's also such a thing as a perceived conflict of interest, which I think you kind of touched on. If it's not a conflict of interest, it's not a conflict of interest, but there may be times when you may choose to not participate or not accept a gift, not because it is a true conflict, but because you don't want to be perceived as such, and that's certainly your prerogative. Again, if you have something that comes up, give me a call and we can talk through it. Then you can decide ultimately whether, we can identify whether it's a conflict or if you're just concerned about the perception, and then you can make the decision accordingly.
If we do ever need to recuse ourselves, are we actually, I thought I heard that you're actually supposed to remove yourself from the dais, like you're supposed to actually leave.
That's probably not a bad idea.
Okay.
At a minimum, you don't want to say anything and you don't want to participate in any kind of conversation. If you want to get up and leave the room, that's certainly fine.
Okay, thanks.
So long as you're not influencing the outcome. And we've touched on this already, so gifts, if they're offered to you because of your position on the council, then decline. But if they're offered to the community at large or some, Costco members or, people at the bank or whatever the case may be, and they're handing out pens, that's fine. Robert's rules, you're probably familiar with. The big thing that I want to remind everybody is, as I do every year, is decorum. There's a reason for the decorum that you want to be polite and courteous and respectful to each other as well as the folks that come before you here. Absolutely free to disagree and disagree vehemently if you so wish with each other's ideas, but please always abstain from any kind of personal attacks, and I don't expect this will be a problem at all, but I just want to remind folks that you can disagree with your ideas without, getting personal. So just a reminder about that. Robert's Rule specifically requires that level of decorum, and our ordinances adopt Robert's Rules. There's in your materials these handy-dandy 20 motion chart here that you can look at, and there's some additional information in your materials as well on the various motions and their standing. And it's in your materials, and that's that. So on that note, anything else I can help with?
Thanks so much, Valerie.
I tried to keep it brief.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the orientation overview of council resources by City Administrator Brecklin.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you, Council President Gerhart. I've got the unenviable task of presenting an orientation presentation after you've all been sitting here for over 3 hours, and we're also here last night for at least two. So I will breeze through this. Much like Valerie's presentation, mine will be emailed to council tomorrow, so you can also refer to it if you have any additional questions. Open door, open phone. Feel free to call, stop by at any point, and I'll be happy to try to assist in whatever way I can. If you have questions as I'm working my way through the presentation, which I will also try to keep it moving, feel free to let me know. So contact information for both Adam, Sarah, and I, who you obviously have met previously and saw earlier today, is listed here on the slide. Today we'll look at a brief overview of departments and the staffing, department heads and staff, agenda information, common council meetings and resources, the role of the council, all their conduct, committees, commissions, boards, and questions. An overview of staffing. Here's a breakdown of our current staffing that's authorized by budget. You can see the breakdown by departments, and the total authorized FTEs is approximately 192 employees. If you factor in our part-time, paid-on-call firefighters, LTEs, and so forth, we are at approximately 275 employees throughout the city. The organizational structure is listed here. I do need to obviously update the council photo now that we have a new one from yesterday, so we'll get that taken care of. But you can see the overall organizational structure of the city. Obviously, our constituents are at the top of the organizational chart. Our city council, municipal judge, and mayor, then our overseeing of city staff. So the mayor, her direct reports are the city attorney, the city administrator, the police chief, and the fire chief. And I'm responsible by ordinance for the day-to-day operations of the other city departments, which you can see the direct reports that I have are economic development, finance, human resources, planning and zoning, public works, building inspection, and then the deputy city administrator and the executive assistant. And then you can see below the deputy city administrator's direct reports are the city assessor, the city clerk, the community media services manager, the information technology director, the library director, parks, forestry, and recreation director, and the senior center director. There are a total of 17 city departments, and as I mentioned, 4 report directly to the mayor, 6 report to the city administrator, 7 report to the deputy city administrator, and the municipal court reports to the municipal judge. If you're interested in learning more about what each department does, there's several ways in which you can do that, one of which is the employee handbook lists a summary of each of the departments on pages 11 through 13, and you can locate a copy of the handbook on the city's website. Obviously, I would encourage you, and there's reference to that later in the presentation, to reach out directly to department heads and feel free to schedule a phone call or a meeting to become more acquainted with any operations that you may wish to do so, or ask any questions about agenda items or those sorts of things. And also later in the presentation, you'll see that there's opportunities for ride-alongs, largely in our public safety departments. But I suspect if you want to take a ride in, say, a snowplow or something, we can arrange that as well. I can't say that you'll get to operate any heavy equipment. Then that would be problematic for me. Yeah. So we do have one couple of things to note from a services side of things. Our fire service is provided by a city department, and our EMS service is provided by the Fitchburg EMS district. That is a joint EMS district that has been in existence since the late 70s, serving the cities of Fitchburg, Verona, and the town of Verona. And then our police department participates with 4 other Dane County cities in the Multi-Jurisdictional Public Safety Information Systems Commission. That is largely the computer-aided dispatch, records management system, and other police technology-related matters that they collaborate on and share resources. Obviously, department heads and staff are trained and experienced professionals in their field. They are responsible for the day-to-day operations of their respective departments. And again, as I mentioned, you're encouraged to contact those department heads with any of these sorts of things. I will point out from an operational perspective, if you're on a committee or commission, for example, and they're thinking about recommending new programs, initiatives, or proposals for new ordinances, it certainly would be helpful to engage city administration, legal, and any of the departments that are impacted by that, so that we can assist in the development and offer some insight on that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a bit later. Of course, all city staff is expected and always does act and recommend in the best interest of the city. And Adam and I do ask to be included in email correspondence with staff, largely because he and I are ultimately the ones responsible and accountable for the day-to-day operations, and it also allows us to help facilitate making sure that you get the information that you are seeking as well. If we are not aware that you've made a request, we certainly can ensure that you got a response to that.
Just to clarify, so I don't not bombarding you emails, like any email that we like request something like CC you both or either.
We do appreciate it. We obviously know that can slip by at times, and we've also asked our department heads that if they're replying back to also just include us in as a matter of awareness. So
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep. Council meetings generally held the second and fourth Tuesday of the month at 7:30. The first meeting in July and the second meeting in December are typically not held, and I believe Mayor Arata Frada intends to continue, certainly with the July meeting not being held this year. Committee of the Whole, fourth Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. As Valerie mentioned, a quorum of common council for the purposes of holding a meeting equates to 6 alders. If you are unable to make a council meeting, Committee of the Whole, please notify the mayor, council president, city clerk, or city administrator if you're unable to attend or will be late. Agenda information. The council packet, for instance, is posted to the city's website on the Friday before the meeting. That is as stated in ordinance. All committees, in fact, their agendas are typically posted by ordinance on the Friday in advance of that meeting. The agenda purpose provides a structure to facilitate efficient and effective use of the meeting time and also to satisfy the subject matter and noticing requirements of the open records laws that Valerie had just mentioned to us. And as she also mentioned, if it's not on the agenda, it can't be lawfully discussed or acted upon. Apologize for this slide. I tried to get a little bit more information into it, so the font size bumped down. But the agenda packet does contain supplemental information for agenda items, including the referral sheet, which will have a brief overview of background of the item, as well as a staff recommendation in some situations. Supporting documents will also be included. Those might be permit and license applications, development plans, contracts, staff memos, etc. And then, of course, the resolution, which ultimately is the direction to be given or action taken that the council is authorizing. If you have any questions, please, we do encourage you. I know you're all busy, and it can be difficult to look in advance. But if you do see something, for instance, that was referred out last night at the council meeting for a report back in 2 weeks, we encourage you to contact Adam or I or the department head with any questions to allow us to be potentially better prepared during the meeting when you may also ask that question and have that information available. Or it may also help clarify any questions that you may have in advance of the meeting. And you're still also obviously more than welcome to continue to ask those questions, even if they have been clarified with staff ahead of time, just to demonstrate to the public that you've posed that question. And since they may have that question as well, it allows the answer to be publicly stated as well. So feel free to ask those questions. If you want to add an agenda item, typically the mayor is the one that will add those items to the agenda. 2 alders may also work in concert with one another to add an item to an agenda. And then, of course, the council can have a formal motion to add something to the agenda as well. And then agenda items from elected officials, and actually since this presentation was given last year, now includes staff, need to be submitted by noon on Wednesday before the meeting. If you have any assistance or need any assistance with drafting an agenda item and the relevant documents, please reach out to myself or Adam or the department heads for any assistance on that. Consent agenda, you saw that last night. Routine matters are added into the consent agenda. Single motion, seconded and adopted by majority vote to approve, adopt all matters on the consent agenda. Oftentimes, those are minutes, some finance-related items, and then referrals to committees and commissions. And then, as you saw last night, an alder may request removal of an item on the consent agenda to be discussed separately and acted upon. And then the vast majority of items are referred at a council meeting for action at the next council meeting or at a future council meeting. There are occasions where direct referrals do occur, and generally speaking, in a direct referral, that it would be acted upon at the meeting in which it was direct referred to, and is usually done due to time sensitivity with that particular matter. Public comment on non-agenda items. Members of the public are welcome to provide comments on items not on the agenda. All of our meeting agendas have that ability to do that. They're all noticed or agended that way. Generally speaking, comments are limited to 3 minutes, and that also generally applies to committees and commissions. Of course, the chair of each individual meeting does have some limited discretion there to make adjustments to that. And no discussion should occur with anyone making a public comment because it's not properly agended to create a discussion. And if you have interest to discuss a topic further that may have been brought up during a non-agenda item, we can certainly work together to get that added to a future agenda to allow that discussion to take place. Alders issued a city email account. You all have one of those, and as Valerie mentioned, it would be advisable to use that for all of your city-related communications. You can contact IT if you have any questions related to that. And then the password reset has been automated utilizing Office 365. So if you do have password problems, you can first try to automate that or use the automated system to do that. I will encourage you to sign up for notifications. I will attempt to use the hyperlink there, and it is working, which is excellent. So if you go to the city's website, you can go to the Notify Me page here, and this is also helpful when you're talking with constituents to help guide them to this area. And I also have a handout that I'll provide that identifies ways in which the city is currently communicating and outreaching with its residents. But you can click on the Notify Me section here, and then you can scroll down and determine how you would like to be notified either via email or text message. And then with any of these particular topics, oftentimes they're related to particular meetings and the agendas associated with that. We also have specific projects or neighborhood plans that you could potentially sign up for whenever there is notifications. You can sign up to receive information regarding public safety alerts, transportation emergencies, utility emergencies, and so forth. So there's a number of things that could be signed up for, as well as news flashes. So anytime the city puts out a news flash or media release, you can sign up to receive those. It's a probably, to be honest with you, an underutilized resource. So,
and Chad, I'll just reiterate, this is not a fixed list. So it's good to go back and revisit this every couple of weeks to make sure that if something interesting has popped up, you can sign up to get notifications.
Yep, Alder Jetzer is correct. We will add things periodically, and occasionally we'll go through and clear out things. If there's a road project that wrapped up a year ago, we're going to clear that one out so that it tries to clean up that list because I know it's already fairly long. Obviously, city staff, again, as I mentioned, is a resource for you, and then looking at the council resource page on the city website, you can find that by clicking down here on government and then going to common council, and that's currently the page that I'm on, and then the council resources are here. We're currently working to add some additional documents to this to make some of our plans and studies a bit easier to find, or any other relevant information that alders may wish to see. If there are specific things that you'd like us to add to this page, send Adam or I an email, and we'll definitely be willing to take a look at that, because we're going to try to make this more of kind of a one-stop shop, so to speak, for those items that the council may be most interested in to help cut down on the time you may need to spend kind of looking around through the website. Whoops, sorry about that. A couple other items just to point out on the resource page is the committee commission handbook. We recently implemented a handbook earlier this year that provides guidance to staff contacts on who are serving as on committees and commissions. And I would encourage you as alders to take a look at that. It is helpful information as you navigate the committee role that you have. Capital improvement plan and then other documents, including the city attorney presentation, are out there. I would also encourage you to take a look at a number of other plans that are out there. I know a number of you who have served on council for a considerable amount of time are familiar with all these, but for those of you who are just joining us, things like the comprehensive land use plan, the park and open space plan, which also is currently under update, financial records and reports, housing reports, healthy neighborhoods initiative, tax increment districts and plans, other planning studies such as the Southdale neighborhood plan, org charts, and the organizational review and staffing plan. All of those things are out on the website. These are all actually hyperlinked in based on the time we're at. I'm not going to necessarily go into all of these, but what I can do is I will just briefly hop out of here and go onto the city website and just demonstrate another way in which you can find things. While not always completely effective, utilizing the search tool can be helpful. So if I put in comprehensive plan, you can see it pops up here, and then you can at least see the search results that might pop up, although I can tell you right now that this is not the most recent version of the comp plan that's populating. So, yeah. So Google's always a good way too, so. I see I lost my place on my slides, my bad. So just a brief overview, I won't go into a lot of this, but the city ordinances dictate and determine what our form of government is, the compensation of the council, rules, quorum, powers of the city council, and standing committees. Those ordinances are all specifically listed here. You can use the city's website and locate all of the ordinances there. Chapter 6 identifies the ordinances related to commissions, committees, and boards. It's important to note that the vast majority of committees, commissions, and boards are advisory to City Council in one way, shape, or form. I know that that's not necessarily in their name, but they would obviously make recommendations, if you will, or otherwise advise the council. They do not have authority to pass legislation, set policy, or direct staff. That is reserved for the Common Council. And as I mentioned, a staff contact is assigned for each of these committees, commissions, and boards. And I would encourage you to talk with them to learn more about what they're up to. And in fact, you should be receiving emails over the next week or two from our staff contacts. They've been instructed to send an email to all of their new commission members, welcoming them to the committee, giving them some background on what the committee's been working on recently, link any plans to it, and share their contact information.
Chad, I think it would be good to include the link to the actual, the code, the library.municode.com.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have that link for a little while when I first started. So
sure, yeah, we can do that. And that's one easy way to find that too is when you go to the city's main page, just hover over the government section, and on the drop-down menu on the right-hand side as city ordinances will pop up. So that's another way to locate it. But I will look to add a link into a future presentation here so that we can more easily locate that. And then other roles and conduct. A lot of this information is pulled from the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, and we'll talk a little bit more from their perspective a little bit later here. But your individual role lies within your vote, and independently you lack authority. You obviously, it's improper and potentially illegal to unilaterally order or direct staff to do something you want or to represent the city's interest or position when not authorized to do so. You must work together with your fellow alders to adopt rules, policies, resolutions, ordinances, and set priorities at a published and accessible public meeting. Your responsibility clearly is significant. Decision-making on behalf of residents of the city is one of the primary roles of an elected official. And as you know, your decisions may impact the community for decades to come. Compliance is a necessary component of being elected official with the noted items that Valerie just covered. I won't spend any more time on that. Valerie also talked about Robert's Rules of Order and demeanor and decorum and conduct. I won't spend any further time on that. It is contained in the slides. Closing and questions. Again, some of the things that I would recommend doing is reaching out to our department heads. I would encourage you to schedule a ride along with our police and fire departments. And if you have an interest in touring city facilities or other things, again, reach out to those respective department heads. Clearly, city administrator, attorneys, department heads, and other employees can answer questions, provide any background or history on some things. And then, again, I'll hand out something related to the how the city communicates. And we have some information that I'll also pass out related to pocket guide for open meetings laws and ethics code from the League of Wisconsin Municipalities that I'll just start passing those items out now. I would encourage you to go to the League of Municipalities website. They do offer training for elected officials. So if you do have an interest, if you go there and see anything from the League that you might have an interest in attending, feel free to reach out to Lisa Sanford, the mayor, or I. There is a small amount of operational money that's budgeted each year to provide a limited amount of training funding for elected officials. So they do have some great information. I do have on order some additional books for our two new alders. I know that this may not be your first appointed or elected position, but we have found that this is a handy resource for newly elected folks, again, coming from the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. Unfortunately, I only have one of them this evening, hence why I've got some on order. So what I'll do is I'll leave these two when I have them at your desk here. So when you're in for the next time, I'll just be waiting for you. So, and of course, as I mentioned, I'm available for any sorts of conversations, meetings, and so forth. Myself and all the city staff looks forward to working with you as we collectively serve the community. So, questions, comments? Hopefully that wasn't too fast.
Can you mention that we are working also on the Alders pages and we are waiting for the information?
Yeah, absolutely. I know you received communication from Mayor Arata Frada. We have added we intend to add a section under the City Council or Common Council web page, individual pages for each of the alders so that you can have your headshot that was just taken at the most recent meeting, as well as share some information about you there that may be of interest to the community. So I think we have 4 or 5 folks, but if you could, those of you that have not shared that information, if you could do that by May 1st, that would be helpful.
It's going to be going live with the people that we have. So
yeah.
I have a question on that. So when we're answering, there's that form, what are your interests, this and that. Are we looking for a bulleted list, or are we supposed to come up with some flowery prose in there to advertise ourselves as being very fancy?
I want to hear your flowery prose.
That's as flowery as I get. I'm exhausted.
Ask ChatGPT to do it.
How about you send us both options and we can assess them?
Yeah, let's do both.
So you want me to prepare 2 budgets?
2 budgets.
Shoot, that seems fair.
Touche, yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chad. Appreciate that.
Sure. Thank you.
Next,
can you explain for the people preparation for plan when they had to for the planning department? They also have a nice memo that is going to be for the new council member to know about that memo. That is easy for them to do. This is a summary for all the discussion that we have about planning in the council.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I do know what you're saying. So the planning and zoning, or city planner and zoning administrator, Deanna Schmidt, obviously is the staff contact for the Plan Commission, which the mayor and council president Gerhart are serving as the reps from council on that. She prepares a memo for each of the items that show up on the Plan Commission, and we have recently begun to implement that. That memo is now going to be included in the appropriate sections of the council agenda, so you also have that information available to you as you consider Plan Commission items that come to the council. But if you ever have any questions related to a Plan Commission item that does show up on the agenda, if you don't immediately see that memo linked in the council agenda, I would encourage you to go to the Plan Commission agenda, and you will find that memo there, which outlines each of those agenda items.
It's a very nice summary, you know.
I heard it's a really nice memo.
Yeah.
It's a great memo.
They're usually very thorough.
All right. Next item on the agenda is discussion of future committee of the whole topics. In the interest of time, may I suggest that I accept emails, and we can maybe discuss it at the next committee of the whole if anyone wants to have a verbal discussion. Any objections?
No.
Okay, moving on to
Yeah, I
announcements.
got to object to that because
Our next committee of the whole meeting is May 22nd, 2024. May I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned at 10:33 p.m.